Pursuant to Chapters 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Grafton Planning Board is being conducted with both in-person and remote participation by board members and members of the public. Remote participation by the public for the public comments agenda item, the public hearings, and any other matter for which the board allows public participation will be via the Zoom raise hand feature. If you raise your hand on Zoom, you will be enabled at an appropriate point to enter the meeting via voice or video to make a comment or ask a question. In all cases, whether in person or remote, please identify yourself by name and address for the record. Every vote tonight will be taken by roll call. Please note that this meeting is being recorded as well as being broadcast live on the Grafton Community Television Government Channel. I'll begin with the roll call of the board to make sure everyone can hear us. Mr. Robbins.
Present.
Mr. Hassinger.
I'm here.
Ms. Hassinger.
Here.
Mr. Venkatraman.
I'm here.
I am here as well. Associate Member Maura McCormack, I believe, is not present right now. I do not see her. We do have in the rooms our new planner, Miss Coughlin.
No. Stay here.
And our temporary planner, Eve Tapper.
I'm here.
And on Zoom we have Natalia Alward as well.
Present.
Do you want
All right.
to introduce Bob too?
And I'll open with our first agenda item, which is public input. Anyone who has an agenda, anything to bring to the board's attention that's not otherwise on the agenda, now would be the time to raise your hand or on Zoom or in person, and I'll hear from you.
Yeah, quickly.
Okay, I'm still getting feedback. But I do have one thing to mention.
Sure.
Since it's past January 1st, the period of time to apply for planning board positions will open up soon. I am not running for re-election. This is my last year. So there will be an opening on the planning board that, is not going to happen incumbent. And I would urge everyone in town who has any interest in the planning board really to consider it. It's hard work, but it's very rewarding. Okay, that's it.
And thank you for your time on the board.
Thank you.
And seeing no other hands or any other comments, our next agenda item is an action item regarding MBTA Communities Action Plan. We do have Gabe Trevor on the
Hi.
Zoom. And do we want to kick this off from anyone in particular?
Sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think Fiona did most of the work on the application, and I have reviewed it, and it looks accurate. But if she wants to present, I think that would make more sense.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
So this is a draft version of the MBTA Communities Action Plan, which is due on January 31st, as I'm sure most folks are aware. I worked closely with Gabe and also with Dave Robbins about basically elaborating on a lot of the work that was done to date, but not by much. So essentially this is the kind of final draft that will, based on any kind of outstanding comments or any questions today, I'm planning on turning around these revisions within the next few days and then submitting it to the Board of Selectmen for approval at their next meeting and ultimately submitting it to the state with enough time to basically, basically make sure that we exceed the 31st deadline. So this was a lot of the questions were mainly already filled out. We just kind of elaborated on preliminary zoning strategies and kind of potential actions that the town could take, but most of the work that has been done has been basically already in the application as it states. The major addition that I made was essentially the action plan timeline, where I propose a public outreach period from essentially January 2023 through August of 2023 in conjunction with the master plan. Then we have the development of the zoning through August 1st through December 31st, 2023. Applying DHCD or Department of Housing and Community Development's compliance model to test for density and unit capacity through August 1st through December 31st, 2023, and then holding planning board hearings through when the original discussion was brought to the board in November of 2022 through the end of our final deadline, which would be October 2024, and ultimately town meeting, that approval period. And then I have holding legislative sessions to adopt the compliance zoning at that time through preliminarily October 1st, 2024 through October 31st, 2024. And lastly, submitting district compliance application to DHCD at the end of 2024 between period of November 1st through December 31st. So those were that was really kind of the major addition that I made. I did elaborate a little bit on some of the information that David Robbins included in his draft, but not by much. We really kind of focus on, in terms of the section 3 of the application, how we can address some preliminary strategies. But if any board members want to talk through any of the revisions that are anything that I included, and any like glaring concerns or any things that we want to strike or not include or think are not feasible for the town of Grafton, basically want to talk through that today, and then I will make the necessary revisions. And as Gabe mentioned, he did look at the application and kind of gave it the all clear in terms of compliance and making sure that it's in line with what other communities are doing and that are at the same stages of the town of Grafton. So that is really kind of the gist, just wanting to make sure that the draft as it's presented is acceptable, and if not, I'm happy to make any modifications as needed and answer any questions.
All right, thank you. That
Sure.
definitely looks very good from where I'm standing. Mr. Bird, did you have something on this item?
I do. When we get into the nuts and bolts of the zoning regulations, we really have to pay close attention to the parking, because if we're going to mimic the parking we have in village mixed use, that has been a concern from probably 2 years ago. We went to town meeting, nothing happened in town meeting, along with One Grafton Common or the Grafton Common area to
Yes.
get rid of the requirements in Grafton Common. Everything that I'm concerned with tonight is parking. So in the village mixed use group, which we're going to try to morph into this, you have 2 spaces for a 3 apartments. You have 1.5 spaces for a 1 or 2 bedroom, with no consideration of overflow parking. The bylaws we have right now, for the multifamily, it's 2.25 spaces for each dwelling unit, which forces the developer to start at least thinking about, we need visitor parking. What we have right now on the books for our village mixed use group doesn't really work for Grafton, because we're not in inner city. We don't have the luxury of going to a parking garage or off-street parking. And I think we fell short on the village mixed use group. And I ploy that we definitely look at it for this town meeting. And if we look at all that parking for this town meeting, we have to work on that like now. Because if we start working on it in a couple months, we're going to be too late. And it seems like that is what happens year after year. So this is a perfect opportunity to take a look, step back, and see what we can do.
I definitely would agree. I think we should definitely start looking at that this month, or at least the first meeting in February that we have at the latest. Start having that on our agenda.
Yeah, in terms of planning for possible zoning amendments at the Maytown meeting, we do have that later on in our agenda here.
Yep.
And, there's sort of immediate, in the context of the MBTA zoning, that's something that we have to, whatever we come up with, and we've got a lot of flexibility in terms of what we finally come up with, but whatever we do come up with, we want to pay attention to make sure it's something that works for Grafton.
Right.
And that's a good example, because they're typically they're looking at multifamily zoning in a context of places where they have shared parking, they have commercial parking nearby, they have transit available. That's not us.
Right.
So we have to think in terms of us,
Right.
what works for us. My comment on, obviously, as Fiona said, provided a good deal of input to this action plan here. I hadn't gotten very far into thinking of a timeline. I think the timeline as proposed here seems adequate. It's not hard and fast. We're not going to be held strictly to it. If we don't have our outreach done by the end of August, if it goes into September later, no one's going to come back and ding us on that. And I don't think it needs to be written in the plan, but very early as we begin our outreach, we need to have some ideas about what are the alternatives that we want the public to take a look at. So we've kind of laid out some of the alternatives in this, roughly speaking, in the action plan. I think we'll want to refine that enough to be able to say, here are the options that we think are available to us, and get the public feedback on that. So that's going to be sort of an early part of the outreach is for us to have a reasonably well thought out set of possibilities. There will be more possibilities than we end up choosing, but it's helpful to give the public an idea of the range of. Here are the different ways that Grafton can address the 3A zoning requirement.
And I just wanted to add that as part of, so as Mr. Robbins mentioned, it's a kind of a series of alternatives at this phase of the action plan. So it's kind of really a high level how Grafton is going to be thinking about executing these strategies and then going from there. And there is in 3.1B, there is a bulleted list of options where basically any changes that you foresee coming down the pipeline, and parking requirements are one of them, and we make note of that, and how the village mixed use districts in particular, the parking is going to be looked at and modified throughout the course of this process. So that is included at the time, and make sure to reiterate that.
It's worth mentioning too that parking requirements are a factor in the compliance spreadsheet.
Right.
So it influences how they calculate the capacity of whatever you're zoning for. So that's one of the details that we'll be looking at as we think about how can we tweak, say, the village mixed use zones. How can we tweak those to be in compliance if that's the direction we choose to go? But yeah, parking actually is a part of that spreadsheet.
Yes.
All right. Go ahead, Bob.
I just wanted to say, reading through this, I was impressed at how much we've done over, the years. When people ask, well, why aren't you doing something about housing? And we get criticism. They ought to get this list. I wonder how many towns are ahead of us on that kind of process and progress.
So I assume, Fiona, that if anybody on the board has some additional comments, to get them back to you within the next few days.
Yes, as soon as you can. Ultimately, I want to be able to turn around the revisions and send them to the Board of Selectmen administrative person, so that she can have it on their agenda for their kind of final sign off, and just make sure that we're doing through all the correct channels, which that will be coming up relatively soon. So yeah, if ultimately if I could receive any and all comments within the next few days, that would be ideal. Please and thank you.
And I'll be available. And if you want to CC on me on anything related to this, I'm happy to take a look at things. If that would be helpful for Fiona or any board members.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gabe.
I'm just cautious about pushing giving it to the selectmen too close to the end, because I think the date that you've got now, if anybody has an issue, I don't know how we fix it and get it okayed before the submission date, where things always take longer than you think.
Right.
I think that's why the board needs to decide now, because the next selectman meeting is the 17th, and then they don't meet again until after the 31st.
Right.
So speak now.
I move we go along with this. I don't think it locks us in to that. So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to instruct staff to pass this along to the select board. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and I vote aye. Declare the motion carried unanimously. All right, that wraps up our first action item. Our next item on the agenda is a modification of special permit approval for the 43D project at 244 Worcester Street, Garofalo and Associates. All right. So, my understanding on this is that we have essentially a approval that they're seeking from us for the transfer of the permit and relating to the sale and such. It doesn't change any of our conditions in the approval, and the biggest thing, at least from my read of the letter, that the board should consider is whether we want to approve subsequent automatic transfers of the permit in relation to the entity that owns the property in question. Anyone want to add anything to what I've said, or questions, comments?
If I might, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Donahue.
Thanks so much. Mark Donahue from Fletcher Tilton. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. That's an accurate depiction of where we are. You're used to granting special permits, and as you know, a special permit has to be recorded at the Registry of Deeds. It runs with the land. It binds the conditions of approval, bind future owners of the land in all fashions. That was the scope of your permit. We also filed that permit back in 2021 pursuant to Chapter 43D and the provisions of the Grafton zoning bylaw with regard to that. Both the statute and the local bylaw provide, unlike special permits, that the board has to approve a transfer. It's not automatically transferable. Churchill and Banks, as you'll remember, was the applicant here. Mr. Bakari appeared before your board. He's on this evening. He's formed a single purpose entity, which is the typical thing done in real estate development, to purchase the land and develop the warehouse called C&B 99 Chestnut LLC. He's the managing member of that, and he'll be moving forward with it. We're asking basically that you allow any future owner of the site, because much like any special permit, since that's the extent of your permit, it will run with the land. The permit, when it's finalized, it is on appeal, will be recorded at the registry, and all the conditions will apply as to future use and the requirements you might remember that we had for post-occupancy studies and the like. All of those apply to whoever the owner is in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Donahue.
And if I may just add something, Chairman Wood.
Yes.
I just wanted to make a note that there was in the original meeting materials, a draft, basically letter that was originally attached by Mr. Donahue, where Mr. Donahue and town council had kind of went back and forth about the language that should be modified, and I wanted to just ensure that everyone and members of the board knew that there was an update to the language today, basically to state, and may I read it? So basically, it's in response to the correspondence of your counsel, Mark L. Donahue of Fletcher Tilton PC dated January 9th, 2023. This correspondence will confirm the approval for transfer of the above referenced permit to C&B 99 Chestnut LLC, a Rhode Island limited liability company. Further, this correspondence will confirm that all special permit conditions imposed by the planning board will remain applicable regardless of the owner of the property. This includes, without limitation, condition number 2, which makes it clear that the permitted use is for a conventional warehouse use and shall not be construed to apply to a high cube fulfillment center warehouse or a parcel hub fulfillment center as specifically defined by the Institute of Transportation Engineers under ITE Land Use Code 155 or ITE Land Use Code 156. Lastly, this correspondence confirms that the Grafton Planning Board approves your request for subsequent automatic transfers of the special permit to any person, firm, or entity who holds record title to the property subject to the permit. So I just wanted to make sure that that modified language was on the record and everyone was aware of that change today.
All right, thank you. Need a moment, Bob?
Having a little computer problem here. I just wanted to be sure, when I read that, I wasn't sure if somebody could interpret it that this was an ongoing approval for transfers in the future, or whether this is only approving a transfer now.
My understanding is that is the crux of that language that has been through our town council, just to verify that that's okay from a legal standpoint if we approve it, in that it would allow transfers of the permit and approval automatically with the sale of the parcel. So if someone else takes ownership of the land or the subsequently built warehouse, that the permit and approval that we've granted with all our conditions intact would transfer with the land. So they do not need to seek reapproval for the permit to transfer with a sale.
Is that your understanding, Mark?
It is. It makes it consistent, Mr. Hassinger, with other special permits, which run with the land, so that if someone, by example, got a special permit for a drive-through facility, that's a specially permitted use, then anybody who buys that facility is subject to it. If it says it can't be used between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., they can't use it. It's a condition unless they come back to the board and change it. So it's really just dealing with the unique part of Chapter 43, which really, I think, deals with permits much broader and more specific to operation than special permits.
Yeah, just a note in that regard. The zoning bylaw section 11, which is the chapter 43D, regarding permit transfers specifically, it starts out by saying permits shall not transfer automatically to successors in title unless the permit expressly allows such transfer without the approval of the appropriate issuing authority. So that language is why we're here, is because the 43D, from the 43D aspect of this, doesn't automatically transfer to a new owner without the board's approval. And basically the proposed letter here approves this transfer and approves subsequent transfers should they occur.
And we got advice that, can you hear me?
Yep.
Did I get this working again? We got advice that it was okay to do this, that,
Yes.
it's not something we ought to be concerned about.
Yeah. My interpretation when talking with staff, and I know Fiona just shook her head yes, is that our town council has advised that if the board is okay with this letter, that it is within our legal rights to allow, basically.
Yeah. I'm talking about, is it a good idea?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
We've been conversing with town council back and forth about this for a while, and yes, it's all checked out. So.
Okay. Because that project, as we may recall, had some controversy.
Yeah, I'll say from my seat, whether it's a good idea or not is within the judgment of the board. But from me personally, I think that the conditions as we worded them in our decision binds the property to the extent that the board was concerned about, and that we felt was appropriate. And who owns the property is not really going to change what our decision and conditions have involved. So that's how I look at it.
Well, let's get it done.
All right.
So moved.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second to approve this transfer and subsequent transfers as drafted. Oh, yes.
And also, we just want to make sure that we sign that this evening, if possible.
No, the board needs to vote to make sure to allow the chair to sign it by himself
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
as a separate.
And
make it part of
That's in the motion.
Okay. Perfect.
You must have missed it.
all right. So the motion to approve this and authorize the chair to sign. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger?
Votes.
No, that balances. But
Mr. Hassinger?
aye.
Thank you. Ms. Hassinger?
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman?
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. I will sign that before I leave tonight.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Now we have 2 minutes until 7:30.
That'll be able to take care of 130, 134 Worcester Street.
Yeah.
Real quick.
So our next action item is a temporary certificate of occupancy for 130, 134 Worcester Street for discerned cannabis purveyors.
I'm just gonna sit over here,
Okay.
'cause they might sit over there.
Want to kick us off, Fiona?
Sure, absolutely. So I went out to the site with the engineering consultant, Graves Engineering, last week and reviewed with the owner of the property and their team, and basically checked through and made sure that all of the conditions were aligned with some of the site visit reports that were generated. When we went through, we did find that there was some things that did need to be updated, but at this time there was most of the conditions that weren't met yet were kind of beyond the control in terms of like things like planting, paving, etc. Because of the weather, or there's back order of grates, things of that nature. So from reviewing the site visit reports, going out there, walking and talking to both Dan Sheehan and Jeff Walsh of Graves Engineering, and also Bob Berger, we did not see any reason to not grant the temporary certificate of occupancy, understanding that the final certificate of occupancy will not be issued until all of the conditions have been met.
All right. Any further comments or questions from the board?
Just a question. I'm not too clear in a situation like this between the temporary and the final certificates, how much push there is to get from the temporary to the permanent. Could that just go? That project's been dragging on for a long time, and I can imagine it could continue to drag along a long time. So I'd like to know how much they need to hurry up and get it done so they can get a permanent certificate.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Right.
So, Mr. Hassinger, did you have the report from Graves Engineering?
I have it. I don't have
Okay.
it where I can look at it.
All right, that's fine. So in that report, they have their binder coat only. They don't have their top coat. Some of their stormwater management can't be put in place because they don't have their top coat, which they came in front of this board and said, we don't want to do that for another couple seasons because for one reason or another, we don't want to do our planting for one reason or another. That started this whole process. And I think this board said, that's fine. But I don't have anything really in writing right now. Graves went out, they did a report, they talk about, and I don't understand this temporary sign. Are they temporary? Are they permanent? I think that needs to be clarified. What is temporary? What is permanent? But as the zoning enforcement officer, I'm also enforcing your special conditions. So I can't release a temporary until I get the blessing of this board. But I really think that this board, you have the contractor here and the owner, you need to ask them when they expect to get these particular items that are on Graves' list completed so we can get a document and then we can work the issues that way. But you do have a list of items that need to be addressed. I do not have a problem with issuing the temporary because all life safety concerns have been addressed. It's now only your conditions that are not addressed. Did that answer your question, Mr. H?
I'd like to feel like we had a better way to get things moved, but I really don't know how that level works. I am curious. I don't have the plans that we approved right at hand. For a long time, there was, I know there were gates on the driveways. Did they end up on the plan? And signs, well, I think we required signs, only come in on this side and only go out on that side.
Those signs are installed, but there's a note, I think it's on the last page, Fiona. There's a note that those are temporary signs. I do not understand the difference between the temporary and permanent. We can ask the contractor and the owner, do they consider those permanent or do they consider those temporary? I don't have that answer. May we ask?
Hey everyone, Alan Villator. I'm the chairman and CEO of Discern. We've been working to address any of the concerns that were issued there. I know some of them, as Mr. Berger already explained, were out of our control, and we're still working to achieve some of those. I think to address your question earlier, Mr. Hassinger, where we stand. I am happy to inform everybody that we are actually in the final licensing process, and we have received notification that we are moving to that final license phase. So we do expect to move forward and actually see some people there rather than just construction going on and work being done there in the next couple of weeks. We have addressed, I believe, the majority of those, with the exception of a couple of them. I think you questioned the gate and the signage. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mr. Hassinger asked about the gate, and I know that all the signs are installed, but on Graves' report, they talk about those are temporary signs. I do not know what the difference is between permanent and temporary. And if those are permanent, then we need to have a further discussion with Graves and maybe the board. Does the board consider those permanent?
Sure. Can I ask our contractor to come on and maybe answer some of these questions with us? Yeah.
Dan Page, you want me up there?
Either way, whatever.
So as far as the gates go, when the Cannabis Control Commission did come in and do an inspection, they directed us as to what they wanted for the safety fencing. So I think when the plan was drawn, we didn't have that intelligence from the Cannabis Control Commission. So some changes will need to be made to the final plan because the gates that are installed now are what they require us to do.
Exactly. The commission has already approved the current structure as is and has granted us that final licensure as a recommendation as a result of the current.
I think that we will definitely need those, the plans as updated with the CCC's requirements and approval. Just might be a minor, modifications on our formal approval. But Bob, go ahead. I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm not sure which gates we're talking about. Driving by there, I haven't seen. There were I think that the chief of police had wanted gates at the driveway, at the entrance from the road.
I'm not sure that the chief has come
they
through
were on
the
the plan.
facility and he has given up his blessing.
Yeah, the chief came by and did an inspection last week, or 2 weeks. Was it last week or the week?
I have the approval from the chief of police to issue whatever I want to issue.
Okay.
So he's off the table. The fire department is off the table.
Yeah. Did you issue sign permits for the signs that are there?
Off the top of my head, I'm going to have to say yes. Because I don't have my iPad with me and I can't double check that. But the only signs that you have are directional signs.
Correct.
Yes.
I don't see any signage giving the name of your business.
No, we're still in the process of getting that.
That permit
Actually,
is yet to be
exactly, yes.
pulled.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any further questions, comments from the board?
Are we looking for the
Yes,
board,
okay.
for a vote from the board to approve this?
Go ahead, Mr. Becker-Drummond.
So I'm still not clear what is the difference between the temporary occupancy and the permanent occupancy. So why is the temporary occupancy needed? Maybe from a need point of view, if someone could explain, that would probably help me a little more.
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
They're looking for an occupancy permit that will allow the public to come into the building and open the business. Right now, they have a temporary only for employees to set up the establishment. And I cannot give them a permanent occupancy because these conditions through the special permit have not been satisfied completely. That's why I need something from the board to guide me on what you will allow them to do, based on what is open on the special permit conditions.
We're not looking for relief on any of the
we're gonna address all of them,
requirements.
yeah.
We're just looking for the ability to open this.
Correct. Yeah.
Mr. Berger, just a quick question on the temporary occupancy permit. Does that expire in and of itself, or could the board set a limit? Ask for a limit to be set on that.
You can put whatever you want on it. Really, and I don't like doing this. A temporary expires when all the conditions are satisfied.
Mhm.
So if it took them 20 years to get that done, then in 20 years that temporary becomes permanent. But in the middle, it's just hanging out. So you really should put some sort of timeline or something, like a yardstick on there.
So in that aspect, how long are you envisioning needing to take to finalize all our conditions?
I think the majority of them can be addressed in the next couple of seasons. I mean, some of the things we want to take into consideration.
Seasons?
Well, for example, the planting of the trees can't happen right now because we're in winter, and the planting of those trees would likely fail, and then we'd be at the same situation, replanting of trees. Similar to the paving itself, the recommendation from the engineer at the time was let the ground, the initial layer, settle down first to ensure that the appropriate drainage was taking place as a result of the slope. So that will not happen in the next month or two. So
I would assume 6 to 9 months we should be completed. That's the plan. As soon as the warm weather gets here, we'll get the plantings in, and we'll get the paving done. So we're not looking for.
No, we're not looking for years. No. I think we plan to be operational within the next couple of weeks. It's mostly
So the end of 2023.
I think that's very reasonable.
Absolutely.
Yep. And
Well, I'm inclined to say 6 months, and we can come back and do this again at that point and see how we're really doing.
At least from my seat, Rob, I'm more inclined with giving them the total time that they're asking for, because to me their reasons are reasonable, and I would be inclined to say, like Mr. Robbins just mentioned, till 2020, to the end of 2023, and then if something's not, if these are not complete, then we have a problem rather than it being
I hear you.
6 months and okay, we're back, but there's no real problem, but now let's extend it again.
absolutely.
Somebody make a motion. It's a long evening. We're gonna still have a long evening.
Yep, we're not quite done yet. I'll move that the board authorize a temporary certificate of occupancy through December 31st of 2023.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve a temporary certificate of occupancy until December 31st, 2023. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Present.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare the motion carried by the required majority of four in favor, 1 present.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
thank you, folks.
Thank you.
All right. That brings us to past 7:30. So our public hearings. Our first public hearing on the agenda is request for modification definitive plan approval of Village at Institute Road. We do have the applicant on the call. I do believe we also have a request for a continuance.
Yes. Let's open the public hearing
Yes.
with a reading of the legal notice.
Please do.
Grafton Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Monday, January 9th, 2023, commencing at 7:30 p.m. in Conference Room A of the Grafton Memorial Municipal Center, 30 Providence Road, Grafton, Mass., to consider an application to modify a definitive plan approval, requesting approval for the creation of a new parcel to be used for access to the adjacent development and adjustments to the lot lines of 2 existing parcels at the Village at Institute Road, Woodland Hill subdivision, a 46-lot residential subdivision on property located southerly of Westboro Road and westerly of Institute Road, and shown on Grafton Assessors Map 22, Lot 12. Said property is located in a medium-density residential R20 and office light industrial OLI district. The applicant owner is Pulte Homes of New England. A copy of the application materials is available for public inspection at the Planning Department during regular business hours or on the Town of Grafton website at www.grafton-ma.gov on the Planning Department/Development Projects webpage.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Robbins. So, by way of introduction, I will say I did have a brief discussion with staff this afternoon regarding this application. And so, as the board may recall, when the mixed use neighboring this property, this subdivision, was recently modified, I believe, we suggested and the applicant agreed and put in a connecting road between this subdivision and the mixed use parcel. This modification is because that connecting road was not in place in the subdivision, so they were going to rectify that and put that in. In discussion with staff, after staff did some analysis, it creates a slight problem on frontage for the lots in the subdivision. So that is what the continuous request is in regarding, and it could end up being that they come back to remodify the mixed use in the future to say that they're not going to make this connection because of frontage, in the subdivision, or they may find another solution with the subdivision that satisfies their needs as well. But that's the overall state with this.
Yep, and Chair Robbins, if I may, Essex Petrie with Pulte Homes, and I apologize for the last minute continuance, but we did get a call from the planning department, Fiona, Eve, and Mr. Berger this afternoon, and they brought to our attention something that we missed in the plan that we submitted as part of our modification application package. So we respectfully request to continue to give us an opportunity to meet with that group and potentially others to identify any options that we can go through. Since we've come up with a couple different concepts that we want to walk through with the town to see if it achieves the goals that were brought up at that previous meeting. So I appreciate that.
How long do you want to continue to?
We're asking to be continued to the next meeting. So I believe that's the 23rd. That's going to be pending, coordination of schedules primarily. As I think that once we get the right people in the room, we'll be able to come up with a solution. So it'll just be a matter of coordinating those schedules, and hopefully we'll be able to get that done in the next week or two.
I move we grant a request for continuation to our next meeting.
All right.
Second.
One second.
Can I ask the board if the can I just see this for 1 second?
Sorry.
If the throughway is absolutely necessary, or
Is what?
is that open to?
Fiona, just to rephrase her, since she didn't quite hear, is that she's wondering from the board's opinion on if that connecting road is absolutely necessary for the overall approval of both these properties.
Right. Yeah. Just wanted clarification.
My memory on our discussion as a board is that it was a nice to have on that we were in favor of if conditions allotted it, but that wasn't a hard requirement of ours. But that's my memory.
My recollection too is that it was there was a time during some of the discussions when it was not clear whether, in fact, there was one point, if I remember correctly, where there was no connection between the two. And we ended up thinking, I think the consensus of the board was that it was seen as a convenience for residents of the subdivision to be able to access the commercial businesses and the mixed use property. But really beyond that, it was, I think my impression, as best as I can remember, we always saw it as a convenience, not as a necessity.
Yeah.
Yeah, but did that tie in with the trail system that was so popular during the original hearings that heads off to the west towards the school? I don't have
my recollection on the discussion there was that the potential for foot traffic to the trail system was always a possibility and shouldn't be a issue. But this is in particular regarding the actual vehicular access between the two.
Yeah, I don't remember
Areas.
any connection between the vehicular traffic and the trails.
Correct.
Not so much the traffic as the place to walk.
Yeah.
All right, I don't care.
Yeah. So, just to, without a formal vote, it does sound like the board is not against the potential removal of this connection, but would still prefer if it is viable.
And just to put it out there, I'll we really would like to work with the town to accommodate that request because we do see the benefit in it. And again, it was our misinterpretation of one of the zoning regulations, and so I'd like to think that, well, I at least want to take the opportunity to sit down with the appropriate people to see if we can identify a solution that works for everybody. So I appreciate the extra time.
We're talking frontage on the cul-de-sac in particular.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Correct.
Yep.
All right.
That's
Question, can I add one?
Can I move the question?
So we do have a motion on the table to approve the continuance till Monday, January 23rd at 7:30 p.m. Well, the letter says 7:30. I assume is still okay.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes. Thank you.
Just being sure.
Yep. Appreciate it.
Any further discussion on the motion?
Justin, I just wanted to say that going back to the representative,
Sure.
I have lived in mixed-use communities, and I would guess that the commercial retail businesses, they would want this connection in future. This is at least some captive customers who can walk over there. So think about it. I would recommend having that connection, but with that, we can move on.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, we're in favor of walkability, aren't we? We just heard that.
Yep. Yeah, walkability, huge plus. Drivability, still a plus, but we can go from there. All right. For the continuance, Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. We'll take this up at our next meeting.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Our next public hearing is the continuation of a site plan approval for 25 Snow Road. The applicant has submitted a continuance request, and I do not see the applicant on the call either.
We told them you didn't have to come.
What's that?
We told the applicant they didn't have to.
Yeah. Yeah, we usually do not require them to come for a continuance request, but
Did they say to when?
Yes. February 13th.
So moved.
all right. I have a
7:30.
motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the continuance request to February 13th at 7:30 p.m. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. We'll pick this up on February 13th. And our last public hearing of the night is 58 Follett Street for Selco Partnership, DBA Verizon Wireless. This is also a continued public hearing. Let's see.
I'm so sorry
Yep.
to interrupt.
Oh, come on up.
Good evening. I'm Karen Goldenberg. I'm a stenographer. I need 5 minutes to set up my equipment.
Sure.
May I ask?
Yep. Let's see. Yeah, let's just take a 5-minute recess.
I don't think that's the one I was gonna tell you.
That's okay.
I didn't know what you do that.
I didn't know what to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
The,
So where we left off, we had gone on a continued till today for this project. They've done a balloon test. We have a comment in our documents from William Talcott, the chair for Sutton Planning Board, regarding this project, as well as some additional material regarding maps and other things that Mr. Maxim had suggested we ask for. All set, come on up.
I don't know, you want to sit here?
That,
I see David in the attendees, David Maxim. Are
oh,
we gonna,
yes.
Brought him to a panelist.
Yep.
Want to set up in the corner here?
Yeah, you can, if you can get by, that would be fine. If there's trouble, we can work around it. All right, you want to
Sure.
kick us off?
Yeah, we're stalling a little because our RF guy, I think, was pulling into the parking lot a couple of minutes ago. So he should be here soon. There he is. Good. Okay. Thank you. Happy New Year. I'm Michael Jarmo, Robinson and Cole, representing Verizon. When we left you the last time, it was the next thing on the agenda was going to be the balloon test, which was conducted. I think you should have the results. I don't know if that's something you want to display now, or if you want to discuss them at all. I was not at the balloon test, but I've reviewed the results. There's some visibility from Sutton, from the nearby housing development. The rest of the sites were either not visible or minimally visible above the tree lines at a distance, pretty much the way we expected the balloon test to come out. There probably are some members of the public who have their own thoughts on that, but as far as sites go from a visibility standpoint, this is a pretty good site for most of the surrounding area. You'd also written us a letter.
Yes.
In December 20th, I think. We pulled together over the holidays and such. We pulled together as much of that information as we could, and we got it to you. I think some more has come today, which we have not submitted, but Sohail is here and able to present some more of those alternate sites. And
Yep.
so if that's what you want us to do, we'll follow your lead on this, but I know the board generally is looking for a little more information, so we want to be responsive.
The more information we have, the better we have for making our determination in favorable and not,
Of course,
kind of things.
yeah. So, and we want to be responsive to what you've asked for. Sohail, do you want to present there were some
Bob, go ahead. I
alternate
see your
height-
hand.
Okay. So he's going to present some alternate height, the plots that you'd asked for about alternate heights.
Yep.
For a tower. Back in the corner. You put the boards up. Maybe Jesse can help you with them. And
actually, the other corner over near Fiona would be good, because the camera can see it more.
Oh, that's a good point.
Not easy to get to, but yeah.
Which corner would you like? I'm sorry. That corner?
Please, yeah.
We can do it.
The camera just moved. I think the camera can move to the.
Speak behind you there? Does that work?
Absolutely.
Bring yours. I guess you're going to talk about yours first.
I think you need a microphone.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You can sit and use that microphone. Yep.
Yes.
You're gonna have to flip, sorry. Good evening, everybody, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So there were a few options that I was asked to take a look at. And I ran some different heights on various candidates, including the primary, which is originally at 165 feet. And so starting with the first slide, I can go over each and every one and explain what we presented last time, and then go through the others. One by one's fine. And I'll just quickly go over this. So the previous one was where you had more white spaces, and then the blue. This is great, perfect. Yeah. This is the proposed site location for Grafton 5, and compared to the previous slide as I presented last time, all the green that you see has been filled in by this proposed location. Then we presented these were the sector maps, so the existing coverage from some of the surrounding sites like this, Northbridge, Sutton, then you've got Millbury 5, and in addition to the sectors that are currently serving this area, we were asked to provide some data and coverage from Grafton 4 and Grafton 2, and the impact of Grafton 5 site on these two existing sites. And again, this is just showing the terrain. So in this slide, this is the addition this time, where I'm showing the coverage from the sectors that are pointing towards this area where Grafton 5 is. There's no need to, there was no need to propagate sectors that are, the directions you can see, it's pointing here and this one's pointing away. So I only propagated this one and this one, which is beta and gamma sector, and also beta and gamma sector for this one. So purple is from Grafton 4 and this one's Grafton 2. And on the next slide, you will see the impact from Grafton 5, which will fill in with the green coverage. And you see that Grafton 4, this color is taken over by some of green. And the reason why I didn't show this initially was because I try not to put too many, and it becomes very cluttered and a little confusing to explain. However, you know, we can show all the surrounding sites that are in the map, and I do have data for them, but it's, you know, the faraway sites, for instance, this sector facing away, there's no need to show it, no need to show, because it won't have, the new site is not going to have any significant or any you know, meaningful impact on those sectors. So that was one of the things that we were asked to present. I do have some coverage stats as well for you know, how much population count, how much traffic is being offloaded in terms of population, in terms of road coverage, and houses or structures, as we call them.
Can you present that, Sohail? Do you have that to present to the board?
Yes, absolutely. My file is right there.
Yeah, I think the board is looking for some
glasses.
Oh, I think you put them on the.
Oh, yes.
I think numbers would help the board, so you can
Absolutely.
understand
Yes.
the impacts of these different locations.
Mm-hmm. I don't have that printout on me in this folder, but I do have the. I
can.
Yes, if you
look for data that you sent me, Sohail, but I think the point on these offloading and also the height is to explain how the comparison is between the proposed, the proposed site and what work it's supposed to do.
I will say, I think if we don't have the data easily just presentable tonight, just having it in our records would be good enough for the.
We'll
Yeah.
supplement. Yeah, we will.
Yeah. I do have it. It's just not in hard copy.
Yeah.
I can pull it up. When Mike's presenting or something, and I can share that information as well.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
This isn't helping me decide about the height that you're asking for. It's just not helping me. And I don't think we're getting anything out of it.
Hey, Mr. Hassinger, this is really in response to some questions that the chair had asked, so we are going through those, but we do have height information. I think, Sohail, maybe if the rest of the board feels as Mr. Hassinger does, maybe the most important thing would be to look at the height alternatives that you looked at, please.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, David Maxon here. Do you want me to wait until they've finished with the presentation, or do we want to attack these things one by one as they present them?
I'm indifferent. If the applicant has a better, would prefer
One by
to make
one.
it easier. One by one, or at the end, I don't mind running with it.
I'd like us to do them one at a time. I'll have a little better chance of remembering what my questions are if it's less time.
Yeah, I think if the priority is the height alternative at the site, let's look at that first, and people can weigh in, and then you had asked about some alternative sites. We can then talk about those. Does that work? Okay.
This is David. I think you've just started in whatever, it might be a random order or it might be in the order of the questions were asked, to respond to some of the information requests. Since we have just discussed the sector maps of the proposed site, I would like to comment briefly on that, if I may, before we move on to the height questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So when looking at the sector maps, what we're looking at is, it's not about the height. It's just about what the proposed facility is doing to improve the network. And it's one of the ways of looking at it. And I think that it can be very helpful. So what we see here is 20 years ago, we'd call this a boomer. It's got a huge footprint. As you can look down on the lower left on the, yes, you have the same one up I'm looking at. Good. Sutton, the Sutton, I assume that's the alpha sector there, pointing slightly to the east of north, which is yellow.
Yes.
Right. So the proposed Grafton 5 facility becomes the dominant facility and leaves very little for Sutton yellow to cover. And so, I mean, that would be an example of a place where it doesn't seem to me that it's all that necessary to be pushing so much coverage into Sutton. And then if we look at Millbury 5, that's not quite as small a an orange footprint to the lower right. If you look at those little petals, each one of those is a wedge representing an antenna. We're only concerned about the antenna that's pointed towards Grafton 5. So 2 antennas are showing orange from Millbury 5, but those could actually be 2 different colors. And so what we're seeing there is a similar thing where the Grafton 5 is so dominant topographically that it's throwing coverage very close into Millbury 5 coverage area of that second sector, the beta sector, pointing southeast. So there's just a lot of coverage going up into Millbury and a lot of coverage going down into Sutton, where you already have coverage from Millbury and Sutton cell sites. So that's one of the observations I have about this particular map, is that this is getting into why I was suggesting looking back at 21 Follette Street, because if the real concern is Grafton, then this thing is throwing a ton of coverage into Sutton and Millbury, and maybe it doesn't need to throw as much into that direction than this proposed site is offering. And that's why I thought this was an important thing to look at. And obviously, applicant can certainly comment on what I've just said.
I think it would be helpful to see where the gaps are. Jesse, if you could pull back one slide, please. No, yeah. So at this point, you can see what Sutton's doing. It's covering all the way up into Grafton, almost to Grafton 4 and Grafton 2 up in the right, and the Millbury site's covering down through well past Grafton 5. So there's some balance, David. But in this slide, does it seem as much of a boomer to you? Because without that coverage, we've got sites in Millbury and Sutton covering most of Grafton, or this part of Grafton at this point.
Yes, and I agree. To the east of Grafton 5, that's very beneficial. I agree with that completely, because it's, as you can see, it's a mishmash of colors in there, and this is also not a standard signal strength map. This is a sector map, which means it's providing a view of what sector is dominant, even if the signal isn't very good. So there is that to keep in mind. But it just struck me that it didn't seem like there was a lot of population or route miles that needed help in Millbury and Sutton because of those existing facilities. You're getting all of that splash of green from the Grafton 5 facility into Millbury and Sutton. And that leaves very little yellow and very little orange from the Millbury 5 and the Sutton sites. So it's almost like it's dominating existing sites in the process. It's just to my eye. But because of that, my conclusion is I think there's more room for considering an alternative location if this location is found to be unacceptable. And such a location might be more central to Grafton and might not need to be on the highest ground. And that being said, I always put this caution when I'm doing these discussions, is I'm not proposing that things should be different. That's up to the board to decide with input from the applicant and input from the public. But that if the board finds that this is an untenable location, those are the kind of questions we would follow in looking for alternatives. And that's all I have to say about the sector maps. Thank you.
Yeah.
Should we look at heights now?
Unless someone has a question about the sector maps, then
I just the dominant thing for me is how well this tall tower fits in, and whether there aren't ways to not have such a big impact. We didn't get to talk about our driving around and looking at and taking pictures. You see in the record, I have a couple of pictures I took, and we'll probably get back to that.
Yep.
But, you have this big high tower providing coverage all over the place. I'm going to want to talk about it. Okay.
So yeah, do you want to-
Yes, are you able to?
Yes.
So he'll just compare the different heights of the alternatives you studied at the site.
So in this, in the next few plots, starting with this one, I broke down the different heights in showing them in different colors. So here, the proposed site is represented by the red, and it's at 165 feet. So at I've got the population coverage, the business population, area covered, roadway coverage, and the structures that each of the heights cover. And
One second, Sahil. So you've studied this red is the propagation from the proposed site at 165 feet, and the green is what?
Green is existing.
The green is coverage coming from other sites,
Surrounding sites.
even if this site is transmitting.
So if the surrounding sites are dominant, they're shown by green.
Okay.
So anything stronger than, say, minus 95 compared to red will be green.
So that's different from what you just showed on the sector map, because it gives a very different picture. If you go back to Dave Maxon's remarks, this doesn't look like the red is doing very much in Sutton at all, and it's not doing as much in Millbury as the prior one was.
So
That's the difference between the best sector map and the propagation map with a neg 95 cutoff. Is that?
That's because sector maps show it differently, and this will be what a user would experience. That if the surrounding coverage is stronger than minus 95 dBm from the surrounding sites, then it would be green, and the red would be 165 feet from the proposed site.
And the white areas are areas that don't get signal stronger than neg 95 from any place.
That is correct.
Okay, all right. So that's just for the board's sake, that's giving a kind of a different picture, different spin on what David just talked about. It looks a little different in this type of analysis. So go to the next height, because the chair and David had asked about different heights.
Okay, we can go to the next one, and I can compare.
Yeah.
So at 165 feet, I can share this document.
this one, just to ask real quick, this is the current proposal that was again before us. Is that correct?
This is your proposal, yes. This is what the application has presented to ask for. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question, if I may, Mr. David. I just want to understand that plot that you have. This is showing the existing coverage as an overlay in green that is overlaid on top of the negative 95 dBm coverage of the proposed facility?
That is correct.
Okay, so this is not showing which facility is stronger at any given location. It's just taking all the white space that's left under the green and showing you where the proposed facility will fill in what otherwise would have been white space.
That is correct.
Right. So this is not showing the kind of coverage we were looking at a moment ago,
right,
which was a dominant server coverage.
Right.
This is not contradicting what we just saw, that if you were to do a dominant server coverage at neg 95 dBm, this might be a little bit different, because what you're doing now is I think taking, as I was describing, taking a green layer, putting it on top, sliding a red layer underneath it. So there is some red that is hidden from view by the green. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Justin, I had one request.
Go ahead.
There are many Davids out here. So David Mazan spoke, and we have our own David. Was there another? I'm just curious, who is the other person who was asking questions of Sahil? I'm taking mental notes, and I'm getting a bit lost with the number of Davids. One David talking to another David, pointing to the other David.
This is David Maxon, your consultant.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
I think he may be the only David. I'm Mike Jarmo. I introduced myself at the beginning. I'm representing Verizon as their attorney.
That Mike is probably who you were hearing, is my presumption, unless you were meeting myself or Bob Hassinger. I don't think anyone else has asked questions yet.
No.
Okay.
All right.
Continue.
Sure.
So just keeping in mind, this is 165 feet shown by red. This is 136 feet. Just quick going over all the heights as we flip through the maps. I looked at 4 different heights. One is the proposed height, 165 feet. Second one is 136 feet. Third one is 116 feet, and the lowest is 96 feet. And for each height, I don't think you'd be able to capture, unless you really have, take photos of the maps in your mind and then remember and overlay them. And I think it'll be more meaningful to share the covered population and the area and roadway coverage. So I can tell you that when I compare 165 feet and we drop down to 136 feet, we lose 275 of the population, which is 77.8%. We lose 0.28 miles of coverage. Area covered 0.28 square miles. Roadway coverage is 1.44 miles. And then the structures that are in that covered area are 160. So that's the loss in coverage when we drop down from 165 feet to 136 feet.
That's at this site.
That's at this site. If we drop down to 116 feet, that goes down. Do you want me to share this?
I think, yeah. If I mean, this is what the chair has asked. He's asked for information about the heights of the.
Yeah, we don't have a copy of that on the server. Although I had something on the screen share, but it was an earlier version that didn't have the 116 feet in it.
So so there's, as you drop down, the idea is it just shows a greater so going down from 165 to 136 to 116 to 96, you just lose more and more and more of the area covered, the number of people covered, the number of business population covered, and the structures covered.
I think what we're going to do is, because we only had a chance to answer half of your questions in writing, I think we're going to present a summary for the next time.
Sure.
We'll get it to you after this hearing and before the next hearing.
And Mr. Hassinger, I do see your hand.
Yeah. I'm not surprised that if the tower gets shorter, you cover fewer. If it got even taller, you'd probably cover even more people, wouldn't you?
Just have a satellite.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll get the. This isn't helping me a whole lot. I understand higher towers cover more. If you had 1,000-foot tower, you'd cover a lot. Although you'd have a couple other problems. You see some of those out west, don't you? Along the interstates where nobody lives. Anyway, we're not going to make it through this if we keep going at this rate.
Maxon here again, if I may, just to put a point on that if I can. I'm looking at some maps that I just pulled off the website that I thought were recent that had 96 feet. Are those prior maps?
No, I think you can pull one more to get to 96,
okay.
Can't you?
Because I didn't see, there wasn't 116 on the maps that I'm
Yeah, what was posted to the website did not include the 116.
Yeah, what was posted on the website was a composite map that had all 4 heights on the same sheet, and for purposes of making it a little more easy to compare visually, we thought doing the individual sheets would also be helpful. We have not gotten these to you for your website yet. We will. I think they were just produced today.
Okay.
So those will be also part of the website. But this is the 96 feet, David.
All right. Well, thank you. And the thing is that the reason I like to have a composite map is that you don't have to flip back and forth and compare them. You can just see that as you increase the height of the tower, you get a new color.
But we can put the composite up too. You have it there, right?
And the composite would be, I think,
So
would
do you have the
actually be helpful.
composite?
And the point that what I find useful about that is that sometimes there's a sweet spot. Sometimes there's a huge gain with one jump, and then no significant gain with another jump in height, or in reverse. There's no significant loss in the first cut in the height, and then perhaps there's a more significant loss with the second cut in height. So if it's a nonlinear kind of a function, you might be able to sort of weigh the height of the tower against the visual impact, against the total coverage that's available. But I do want to clarify one thing when we're talking about the statistics. If we took away the green on this map that you're looking at right now, you'd see a much larger blue area. And if I can ask Sohail through the chair, are the statistics based on the total blue area, not just the blue area that's visible through the green?
It's incremental.
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
It means that it just shows what you see on the map. It does not show the total. So it's only incremental population covered, area covered. It would be a lot more if I was to just calculate without the green overlaid.
Okay, so for instance,
this is just incremental.
Looking at a statistic that says the coverage at 96 feet is 3205 pops. Let's see, do you have a square miles? Let's look at square miles. Is 3 square miles at 96 feet. It means that the exposed blue that's showing around the green is 3 square miles. But if you were to take the totality of it, it would be much larger.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
So David, would you like those run as well? Just the standard old-fashioned plots at different heights?
What I like most is the composite because it allows the eye to quickly see when changing from one height to the next, whether there is a marginal change or a significant change in each step.
Without the green?
No, the green has to be overlaid.
The green is this type of map that we're looking at is, I would call it a coverage gain map.
Right.
Which means that anything that's not above -95 is white. And so what this is showing us is where the tower is providing new coverage at -95.
Correct.
And it's different than the other component, which is looking at the sector maps, which help imply capacity because of large surface areas of new color on perhaps areas of development or highways or economic activity. And you can infer how the capacity is being played using those other sector maps. But here what we're looking at is strictly where are we achieving that target level of -95 dBm where we didn't have it before. And that's what this type of map is presenting us here.
Yeah, so if I may, just to make sure that I'm thinking about this clearly, that this height analysis that we're discussing is basically comparing at different heights how much the service provided by the new tower would improve for people in the affected area. It is to say it's an attempt to quantify the amount of improvement that this tower would provide at different heights. Is that a reasonably accurate way of stating it?
I would say so. Yes, that's improvement, or what I call coverage gain. at a specific threshold signal level, which their target is, I think they said neg 95 for these maps. So yeah, so that shows you how this tower at different heights would improve coverage in Grafton.
So we did submit an overlay with all of the 3 heights on it.
Can somebody bring it up?
Yeah, is somebody able to bring that up?
It's on the website.
Yeah, this one,
We have 96, 136, and 165.
right, that's
We
right. Those are
don't
the
have
3 heights you, well, those are the 3 heights you asked
Yes.
for. And I asked Sohail to run 116 because that was in the middle. But David asked for those 3 heights in particular. Yeah, so this is the composite. Green existing, blue is 96, yellow is how much more you get at 136, red is how much more you get at 165. That's correct. Yep. Okay, should we move on or?
One question on this. So, do all these colors have any green existing coverage below? I thought that was what was mentioned earlier, right, to David's question. So if we look at blue, does that have an underlying layer of green?
No, this
or
is
was it all one?
This is from what was discussed is that everything green is what currently exists at the optimal negative 95 coverage, so that without this tower, green is what would be existing at negative 95. With the new tower, at 96 feet is what would be blue. That would be all the new coverage that doesn't exist today at negative 95 would be now existing at negative 95 with a 96-foot tower. And as we get to yellow, that's at an increased height of 136, and red, which includes, of course, the yellow and the blue, would be the proposed height at 165.
Let me just try that another way.
Sure.
If you picture this map as being a white map with streets on it, actually the streets are on top, and you have a green layer, and then you have a single layer with red, yellow, and blue. The green layer is on top of the red, yellow, blue layer. If you were to peel the green layer away, you would find much more blue, some more yellow, and some more red. But if we're looking at this as a map that's telling us where we're getting new good coverage, we're not concerned about the blue that's hidden under the green for this analysis. We're only concerned about where the additional height gives us more new coverage in Grafton. And you can see the increase with the yellow, and then the increase with the red. And if you look at where the red lands, it's in Grafton anyway. It's not like it's enveloping Fitzpatrick Road, for example. It's not as significant in my mind as what the yellow is doing in that neighborhood near Fitzpatrick Road.
Okay. So, from a visual observation, so that was helpful, David. Thank you. So, from a visual observation, is it fair to assume that the blue coverage, what we see, the blue color, green is a given. The blue that you see is the net new addition with 96 feet. That is significantly higher and for the height compared to the yellow or the red. They seem to be only marginally adding to yellow. Yellow could be more, but the red is only a marginal improvement with that height increase of another 30 feet or so.
The red
Is that
picks
a
up
fair-
Millbury Street, though. The red picks up some stretch of Millbury Street, stretch of Grafton Street in Millbury, and stretch of Fitzpatrick Road.
The difference is 70 feet between the shortest and the tallest, give or take.
Right.
65, 69, 69. Yeah, 69 feet difference.
It's a 70-foot tower height difference, basically, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is measuring to the center of the antenna array, not all the way to the top of the tower or even to the top of the individual antennas.
It's measuring to the center line of the antennas, and the reason it's 165 on a 170-foot tower is to allow for the fact that the antennas are going to go up above the center line, right?
That's correct.
And the same with 96. That's a 100-foot tower with a center line 96 assumed.
Yeah.
Basically, you have 100, 140, and 170 tower.
Yeah.
Well, and looking at these from here at home is extremely difficult, by the way. And I don't think there's, when you look at sector maps and all that, David, every day, it's a little easier.
Yes, yeah, it is hard to wrap your head around.
Yes.
Or just decipher what in the heck I'm looking at. You're asking excellent questions that help someone understand. Okay. We'll talk about the conclusions that come out of that at some point.
Can I just talk about the drop in the numbers?
Sure.
When you drop heights.
Yeah. You have that for this?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Maxon, the reason why the maps were shown the way they were, I do have, I did submit them, and I thought it was more meaningful to present to the board in numbers versus just showing coverage, because to the untrained eye, it doesn't seem like there's a huge difference between, let's say, the red and the yellow, or the yellow and the blue. And when you look at the actual numbers, when you drop down from 165 feet to 136 feet, you're losing 433 people, population coverage, which is 8.5%. 512 people of population count, 3 square miles of area covered, 18 miles of road. I'm sorry, misspoke. Was pointing at the wrong place. 3.18 miles of roadway coverage. So even though it's hard to visualize just by looking at the different colors on the map, the numbers seem to tell the real story of how much of area and population and business pops you lose when you drop the heights. And as you go down further, you lose more and more and more, which is why we started off with 165 feet.
Okay. Should we look at the heights? Should we look at the alternative locations, Mr. Chair? Would that be helpful at this point? We have plots for those, I believe.
Does that show that none of them are any good?
Well,
they always do. That's what they always show.
While we're on the pops, I can just talk about at 165 feet, the 21 Folletti Street and the 188 Providence Road candidates. When you compare the three of them at 165 feet, you cover 5,110 population for our proposed location, whereas you only cover, so from 5,100 you go to 3,810 for 21 Folletti, and you go down to 3,500 for the 188 Providence Road. And all the numbers are significantly lower from the proposed location.
Again, we'll get you all these in digestible form. Yeah, so as to hopefully not mash too many different topics together, we've been focusing on different, the coverage gained or lost, for different heights at the proposed location. We still have, and it's worthwhile, reviewing alternative locations and other topics, but are we sufficiently clear on the effects on coverage of different heights at this location?
I am. I think the rest of the board seems to be that I don't see any hands for further questions at this point on heights.
I think we're going to get to a point in the discussion down the line where we'll be coming back to talk about this and maybe even ask more questions. But I think we've heard all that any of us can handle tonight.
I'd like to just complicate it with just a little bit more, if I may. I agree that if you have statistics that are really deterministic, that can be helpful as well. The eye is an excellent signal processor, and that's why maps with colors and color block areas, and you can tell whether the color area is on streets or on swamps, is very helpful. The statistics, unfortunately, at this level of resolution, where I'm used to dealing, my first part of my career is dealing with broadcast, where you have a 50-mile radius that you're covering. And then when you do a population count and you make changes in the coverage, the changes in the populations count will be pretty representative. But in a case like this, population on these maps is based not on house by house positioning of pop counts. You know, there isn't a house that in the database is marked with 5 people. What it is a census block, which is a whole bunch of houses and a whole bunch of land. So that when the land area is cut in half, the pop count cuts in half. But in fact, you could end up not losing any population because the land area that you cut in half is mostly swamp, and that was what was cut out, or vice versa. That when you cut that particular census block in half with the reduction in tower height, you cut out all the houses and all the population, but it still reports half the population because of the way this thing calculates. So you have to take the population counts with a very large grain of salt. They're not that precise at all. In fact, the most precise thing is, I think, the road mileage counts, because you have a road and it's either under red or it's not. It's under yellow or it's not. And so the road counts, and then the total square area, it can be useful, but again, because you have large wooded areas, the square miles is sometimes not particularly helpful either. That's why I think the maps are a very important tool for balancing against the imprecision of the statistical data.
The swamps mention is interesting. I'm just looking here. The blue area between Pleasant Street and Follette, both, well, actually above and below it, particularly above the railroad, that's all blue. That's very little in most of that. That's a large, well, there's a large area in that is reserved land. And you know, we have other there. You know, we have the impoundment, the water for Fisherville, and there's a lot of that blue area that may not have a whole lot in it. Just think about it when you're looking at the maps.
Yes, and I pointed earlier to the yellow area in the wedge between Fitzpatrick and Pleasant. You see a number of streets there, and we can infer that there's a number of residences or other kinds of economic activity there. So that's an area where the presence of that yellow coverage has more power than the presence of the blue coverage in that area that you just described, and would speak in favor of the yellow, the height, because it is able to reach that particular neighborhood.
Okay.
My intuition is that we're going to be focused more on height than the further questions, but I think we can briefly touch on the locations at this point.
Could I suggest that we actually change gears and go to the photographs dealing with the height at this proposed location? Now that we've ingested the statistical data and the coverage maps, we then just say, okay, well, what does the 30-foot height difference make in terms of visual impact? Does it really make a difference or not? Do we need to be sweating this at this location?
I do agree with that movement, but did just get pointed out that I didn't notice Mr. Swarta's hand up at the moment.
Mr. Swarta happens to live in that yellow area.
I do, Mr. Chairman, I do happen to live in the yellow area. And on behalf of the 70 or 80 homes on Barbara Jean Street, I would certainly support the 136-foot height. To move around my house from certain areas that do get better coverage than others, it would certainly be a relief, I think, for most of the residents on the street to have better coverage in the subdivision.
Great, thank you.
All right.
All right. So yeah, let's
move on to the
balloon.
The
pictures.
balloon. All right. Let's see if we can bring that up. Oh, wait a minute. I had that prepped somewhere else.
Okay. Okay, so this is the visual analysis. Some of you hopefully got out to see it. Maybe many of you did. I don't know if you want to flip through if people have different areas of concern. I'm not really sure how to present this or how you.
We're going to expect our viewers to read what's on the screen. I'll give you 10 seconds to memorize it.
Well, the first page really talks about the methodology, and since I know there were some questions about the methodology that have been raised, you know, that describes it. If you have more questions, we can get you answers. I don't have those answers tonight, but I could get those to you if there's specific questions.
Yeah, if you're curious, read. If you're interested, read through this at your leisure to get a better sense of how they approach this.
And you don't have to pause the video. It is in our actual materials on the website.
So, how do we want to proceed through this? I mean, I can sequence through the slides, but that's really up to however we want to present that. I'll just be driving the slides.
Okay. Yeah, the red outline is the property. Obviously, there were dots that showed where the photos were taken from. These dots here.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to read there, but
a little harder to show on that, right?
Yeah.
Are these taken with the recent balloon test, or are these back the ones that we saw in the original submission?
These were taken in December. There was a December balloon test that was noticed and requested at the last hearing. So that's what these are.
Okay, the more recent one.
Yes, sir.
The one from which I submitted 2 pictures.
Yes.
Yeah. So as I understand this picture, these various little notations show locations at which pictures were taken in the turquoise or blue or however it shows up on your screen. Those locations you could see the balloon. The grayish locations were locations from which the balloon could not be seen. Is that correct?
That's correct. And when you say visible, it could be visible to a great extent or a lesser extent, any visibility at all, and they would mark it blue.
Yep. And so, as an example, kind of,
yeah. So
this is one where it's.
Sure, this is a before and after. The picture on the left, it's very hard to see, but there's a balloon floating, and the picture on the right, they've filled in using a computer program and some technical analysis, a tower to conform to where the balloon was observed, and there's a closer view there. And these are taken using a camera that approximates the human eye. So if you did a zoom in or did some other type of a camera, you might see it in a different way. You might get it might look closer. It might look more spread out. But this is intended to approximate the way human eyes work, and at a height of I think 5 feet, thinking somebody's 5.5 to 6 feet tall, and that's where their eyes would be. So.
Yeah, as David pointed out the last time, I'd like to know the focal length or the equivalent 35 millimeter focal length that we're seeing here.
Yeah, and that, I can get you that answer if it's not in the technical. It's usually 50 because that's the expected length that approximates a human eye, but we can get that. I can
What did you say it usually is?
50.
What did you say it usually
My
is?
understanding is it's usually 50, but I will get information from
50.
the folks who did this.
50, because that's the right answer.
Right. That's my understanding is that's how they do these. But I will confirm if it's not on that description.
Yeah, it's not in the methodology.
Okay. Okay. Really, this is the same exercise with in this one the balloon is a dot at a distance and they've filled in a tower beneath it.
Yeah.
Same thing.
This one's barely visible, but it's there.
Right.
And here's another one that's almost completely hidden.
Through the trees, and remember these are leaves off conditions, so if it's something that you're seeing through the trees, chances are it's only visible part of the year. If it's something you're seeing above the tree line, obviously that's not the case.
Right. I'll kind of skip over the ones that are not visible at all.
This is another one where it's visible at a distance near the tree line. These are all taken from the development in Sutton that was on the other half of the Sutton half of this original parcel.
Yeah, but it's from this development that the tower is much more visible than from the Follette Street. You can see.
Now, is that depicting, I'm not sure how fine-grained your process is, but we're talking about 165 feet, 170, 175. The top of that simulated tower, actually the top of the panels, I guess, is at what height?
It should be at 170. I'll confirm that with the guys who did this, but that was the plan, was to do it at 170. If they fly the balloon at about 175 and they fill in the tower underneath where they see the balloon. So,
right. I maybe I'll ask this now, because it's the thing I want to know. David, remind us how much can be added to a tower like this after this permit is issued without having another discretionary process.
Oh, not from a structural standpoint, but from a regulatory standpoint. It's 20 feet. If you interpret the rule the way the industry is interpreting it, which is that even a new tower that's approved can be increased 20 feet in height under the classification of an eligible facilities request for a modification that is not a substantial change as defined by the FCC.
What I've wondered about since that came out was whether now you have a tower that's that high, and can't you make a modification under that rule again? Is there anything that says only one bite?
Yes, the FCC has made it clear that the intent is only one bite.
Now, my other thing is, looking at the plans, I see said that we could easily have 4 arrays on the tower that's proposed, and we're looking at in this picture, and we could have 1 or 2 more if that extension were allowed.
Well, typically carriers are going to find, especially if you permit it at the height that's being requested at, the carriers are going to go for the lowest cost solution, which is to go on an existing tower and to not modify the tower, which means go below Verizon on the tower as long as there's space and structural capacity for it. And then it's only when things get full or when a tower is particularly short that you might see a tower addition. A long time ago in the town of Truro, there were some wireless carriers on the public safety tower, and then Sprint came in and could not go another 10 feet lower. So they paid for the construction of a new tower that was 20 feet taller and moved everybody over onto the new tower, and then they got the top spot on the tower because they paid for the tower. So there are situations where tower height increases might occur, but I think if there's ample space below Verizon, above the tree line, that's not likely in this case.
Yeah, well, I'm just want us to understand how much we could be permitting. I know we had a case where we had an addition to a tower, but it may have been before the new rule, and may have gone through our process up on the north side of town. In any case, so it does happen. In any case, there's more. As soon as the other carriers come around, there are going to be more antennas on there, and it's going to be bolder, a bit bigger, or more noticeable.
If they need coverage there, they would go on that tower. I agree with David. They at 170 feet, they'd be inclined to go beneath. If it's, if the tower were proposed at a shorter height, they might request an extension, as David has said. But the problem is, if they can't go on the same tower, then they have to build a separate tower. So, it's and most towns would prefer to have the fewer locations. I know that's at least the typical practice. So,
okay.
So if I can just add one maybe final thought, which is, now that we're looking at this tower, we see from this particular point of view, if we think this is a critical perspective, it is an area that was basically clear cut to construct high density residential development. And when you clear cut things, you to some extent are asking for trouble. But if you imagine this tower being 30 feet shorter, picture that little module of antennas that you can barely see at the top of the tower as being nominally 10 feet tall. Antennas are as much as 8 feet typically. But if you assume that up there is about 10 feet, and you add 2 below it in your mind's eye and cut the tower off at that point, you now have a tower that's 30 feet shorter. I think that's a good estimate with the cursor there. So that's, does that change in the height make a material difference on the visual impact? And again, weighing it against the benefits of having a tower that can handle all the wireless carriers and do a good job of it. Do you gain much in slicing a tower down in height?
I think you do. And I would like to also maybe point out with the still lower, it would be even better. The couple of pictures I took in this area, it is a little more dominate. I think that if we had the tower drawn in under the balloon, it would be a little more dominating. And it's certainly, in any of these, it's not consistent with what our bylaws seeks to accomplish. Maintain, visual considerations of the characters of the town and so on and so on.
All right, I'm going to step ahead through the rest of the pictures. Again, we're still in the same general area of Sutton. And now we're on a different road in Sutton where it's much less visible. Not visible, not visible. Here we're back on Follette Street. It looks like they've figured out the place where they could see it through the notch in the trees. I think any other position near there, you've got those trees that are blocking it, but we're trying to be fair about this and show you that there will be a little notch where you could see it. Yeah, and again, if going back to our conversation from a couple minutes ago, if you knock 20 or 30 feet off the height of this tower, it becomes most likely invisible at this point. Okay, so that's, yep, thank you. That's the pictures.
Do we want to show Bob's on Zoom as well?
Let's see. Okay, so that's one of Bob's pictures. And there's the other one.
What was the equivalent focal length on this one? Do you know?
I spent a fair amount of energy trying to figure out on my lovely cell phone the 35 millimeter equivalent, and I believe this was the 35 millimeter equivalent, or the 35 millimeter film, 50 millimeter lens,
right.
Equivalent. It's a little hard to say because of aspect ratios, and no, I spent. I know about focal lengths.
If you look at the metadata in the image file, they sometimes present the equivalent focal length.
It's 7.5, I think.
But sometimes they actually translate it for you and provide the equivalent.
I don't. This is it's an iPhone 12, and I didn't see that in my apps. I don't have Photoshop anymore.
Yeah,
but I use the Nikon tool and some others.
Would it be fair for me to assume, Bob, that you took these pictures at a point where the wind was not obviously blowing the balloon in one direction or another?
I didn't see the balloon moving. This was 2:30 in the afternoon, yes. Right, pretty close to the end of the window, and I didn't see it moving around. Now, maybe it's blowing towards me and it's steadily coming towards me or away from me. I can't see the rope, so I don't know. But anyway, it seemed to be reasonable.
Yeah, so just note for the record that a member of the public did submit a video taken that day at a time when the wind was fairly gusty.
And I haven't been able to make that play here.
Yeah.
We've spent all afternoon trying to get that out.
Yeah, it was a little bit awkward to get it to play what I did on late this afternoon, and yes, that just confirms that balloons do move around when the wind is blowing, and consequently, when you're doing the photo simulation here, you have to be very careful and take your photos when you can see that the balloon is not being affected by the wind at the time. But yes, wind does happen periodically throughout the day, and balloons, as we see, are no surprise, are susceptible to that.
Linda's Windows computer seemed to be able to kill it. I tried it on 2 Macintoshes. One's only 11 years old, and the other one's only 6 or so years old. And about that one's about 6 or 8 major releases behind, and this is. High Sierra, but there's something going on here. It might even be Google Chrome's fault because that's never mind.
No. Yeah, in the interest of moving forward tonight, what else do we have to talk about with respect to the balloon test and photo simulations?
Beyond in near future opening to the public for comments, I don't think I see anything else from the board or David Maxim in regard to the balloon test and height. That's new.
Yep. And I gather that they are potentially prepared to discuss alternative locations to some degree.
Yeah.
Do we want to get into that tonight, or do we want to get more information submitted for review before we get too deep into that?
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I think with the time and where the board's focus is on the height, we should probably just continue to review the documentation that's been submitted. If there's any more to come regarding alternate locations or in relation to this as well, we can review that more. I think the biggest thing for me was to have the alternate location and the narrative on our records, and for us to look at. I don't really have any questions from what I've read on it.
Okay. And there is, you asked a number of questions which we didn't have a chance to answer
Yes.
yet, and
Yep.
we're going to get that to you in a package. I think it makes more sense to review it as a package once you've got everything in front of you, rather than do that part on a piecemeal basis, because I don't think tonight we're really ready to.
Yeah, and that,
You don't have everything, you haven't reviewed it, and so it's not really fair to you or the public on that.
yeah, and I would agree with that assertion.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're at a point where
Yep.
the next step forward is best to receive additional information.
Yes, and I would like at this time to invite the public, if they have any questions or comments, to by all means bring them to the board, and if there's any, everything that has been said in the past is still on our record, but if you want to say anything new, come on up.
Hello.
Just state your name and address for the record again, please.
Adam Ray, 42 Follett Street.
Thank you.
The balloon test was inconclusive due to the weather. I'd like the board to view our video. I believe it speaks for itself. We asked that it be done again on a calmer day. I think the video really does speak for itself when you can download it.
Can just to ask, what time of day was that taken at? Do you remember?
I took like 4 different videos at different times of days, and then the balloon basically went from over here, 200 feet over here, dipped below the tree line, popped back up. Earlier and a little later too. Yeah, I did one later too, though. I did one later, but the video speaks for itself. 2, we also don't believe the applicant has shown the infeasibility of an alternate location. They've got 6 places shown for an alternate location. 5 of them are on Follett Street. One of them is on Fitzpatrick. It seems like a small sample size. Would like the board to ask for a much broader search area. Just more expansive. I mean, they put down they can't do it because they asked 4 people on Follett Street for permission. Doesn't seem inclusive. Anyways, 3, the photoshopped rendition with no antennas on the poles that they're showing doesn't seem right. Without the proper visual aids, the extent of the blighting on our neighborhood cannot be assessed. We ask for proper visual aids with all proposed antenna included, proportionally shown. And I don't think the applicant's proposal meets the conditions for granting the special permit as stated in our bylaws. 1, it is not compatible with adjacent properties, 155G. 2, does not protect scenic landscapes, 155J. 3, it is not located below visually prominent ridge lines. The proposal intent of our bylaws to protect the scenic and recreational values of our town and to ensure the adverse visual and operational effects will not contribute to blighting and deterioration of our town. As far as the height and the footprint of this tower, the gentleman who was speaking about the different heights and you could add 20 feet in cans, the business end of this tower, as it's proposed, I believe, will have 3 vertical arrays of 6-foot antennae, maybe with a couple feet in between, I don't know. So we're looking at maybe 20 something feet with the proposal of to go higher. So you would have to drop this to get down below this prominent ridge line. You'd have to drop this tower quite a long ways. And one of our bylaws states that it's not supposed to be on a visual ridge line. I'd also like to read, unless I forgot it, this is a little excerpt from a meeting that our town council had way back when they were dealing with Sutton. And it states, Grafton's regulations take wider impacts into consideration, not just direct ones that have been evaluated in the submitted view shed renderings. They maintain this facility will be visible for 140. Grafton's regulations also place a value on ridgetops like Lazy Hill and seek to prevent this type of installation from ruining valuable view sheds. And I don't think I forgot anything, did I? Yeah, it was from the minutes, but we can get into that. But I'd just like to submit that.
Do you have at hand just which minutes it was, just so if someone?
We can get you all that information. And we could actually just.
I can't hear.
Yep. We can't hear you on Zoom.
Oh yeah. Oh, I could hand this to you, right? Yeah, I could just hand it to you.
Okay.
There you go.
I'll have it handed to staff, and they'll just add it to our records at some point.
Okay.
It's got a little bit of other stuff into it, but I thought I'd spare you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments, questions? Seeing none.
Nothing from Zoom.
Nothing from Zoom. No one else in the room. So I think the next thing we're looking at is just further answers to my questions, some that further documentation we've discussed to have on file, and then time for the board to review that and discuss further at one of our next meetings.
That'd be fine. I think we've got some, on our team, there are some vacations, and so if possible, we would like to continue until one of your February meetings, maybe towards the middle or end of the month.
Sure. We're generally pleased to give you much time as you feel you need. Generally speaking, within the confines of applicable timelines that we're required to. I think we're still within them.
We'd fill out the
Yep.
continuation form for you on that respect.
Yeah. So it would be, in February, we'd be looking at the 13th or the 27th, I think.
Yeah, I was trying to pull up the.
So the 27th would probably work.
Okay.
I'm looking.
Just,
Is that okay for
Yeah.
you guys? Okay.
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, when everyone's able to pay attention, I wanted to kind of ask for maybe David and whatever. Certainly for me, the big problem is this very tall tower, much taller than any we have in Grafton. And as has been pointed out, I'm going to have trouble with what our bylaw says about ridge lines and so on. And tonight, I think, David, I think the talk was, this is adding coverage where there is coverage to the south and southwest of the site, Sutton and all down through there. If you gave up, it's adding coverage where there's already coverage. If you move the tower to the further north, lower spot, on this property, there's ridges and whatnot there, and look for it to mostly add coverage where it's really needed. Maybe we could get it down to a better height. And I think that's partly David understanding those plots better than I can from here. Or maybe we need to get more, get some more information about it. But do you see what I'm saying, David? You had mentioned a location, possibly a different location on that site.
Yeah, I think you're as usual. We've worked together for a very long time, synthesizing integrating the information, I think, pretty well. What I said was that Sutton and the Millbury cell sites are those sectors pointed towards the proposed cell site are dominated by the proposed cell site. A tremendous amount of their coverage area is overtaken by the coverage from the proposed cell site, and it seems that that's less critical. I mean, there may be some capacity issues going forward, but that hasn't been presented, and there's a way to quantify capacity issues beyond just doing those kinds of sector coverage maps. So the primary issue does seem to be coverage. Where do you lack the negative 95 dBm or even the negative 85 dBm coverage most? And of course, Grafton is most interested in Grafton. And what I was posing was that if you look at the nice colored terrain maps that the applicant has submitted, or you look at your own topographical maps, and you know the lay of the land because you're residents, you know that you have this large sort of low area between hills, and that solar array is kind of right in the middle of it. And if you're trying to illuminate the lowlands and the rising ground around the lowlands, you can do that from down below. It won't get into Sutton quite so well. It won't get into Millbury because of the hill at the proposed location, but it could still do a substantial job in Grafton. And I think that's where we're into that little bit of a kind of a wrestling match with what Verizon has indicated it wants and what you might be considering in trying to reduce the visual impact of the tower. So your most recent suggestion, which you just made now, is what if the tower were placed more to the east at a lower elevation, so it takes advantage of distance and reduction in elevation to reduce or perhaps even eliminate the visual impact on that residential development over the line in Sutton, whatever that's called, aerial circle or whatever. Is there a way to do that, still get some coverage thrown into the direction of those residences because they're benefiting from this tower significantly in terms of wireless coverage, without shifting undesirable impacts to other residences in Grafton? I mean, that's always the question, is that if you move it from point A to point B, are you just shifting the problem to somebody else? I think having looked at the lay of the land and development and the lay of the streets, it might be that you could move the thing to the east and mitigate its impact where it's most impactful.
I think that would be very good for them to work on, and they may end up needing to do that.
I want to be clear about one thing though, David, which is Verizon has never said they're trying to cover Sutton or Millbury, and in fact, it's the white areas that are showing up on the board now. I know you understand this, but just to be clear for the public and the board, you pointed out a technical fact that a tower on this hill at a certain height is going to be very powerful in terms of sending signal in some directions that already have coverage. But the real reason the tower is needed in this area is to cover the areas that aren't covered. It's not to recover the Sutton or the Millbury areas. We're not looking for so much a capacity fix as we are for a coverage gap fix. And I know this. I know you understand this very well, probably better than I do, but I just wanted to be clear that folks on the board and in the public understood that.
Yeah, I think that's what I was just thinking about, what opportunity that gives us to get closer to something we could approve. Okay. We're going to have trouble getting our last agenda item in. Do you have a request for a continuance in hand?
We will.
Well,
We have a
it's
verbal
okay.
one, but we will have the physical in a moment.
Do we have a date?
I think we said the 27th.
27th.
27. I move we approve the grant the forthcoming written request to continue this hearing until February 27th at 7:30.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to continue this till February 27th at 7:30 p.m. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger?
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger?
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman?
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. We'll pick this up again on the 27th, and in the meantime, any further comments or anything, feel free to send it through and we'll see you. Thank you. Alright. That, I know we're gonna have a few minutes for the for the room to clear, but our next agenda item will be Stillwater Estates, 11 Willow Road.
Sorry.
This is it.
Oh. Yes.
Justin, I'll be back in 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll give you 3 minutes. So the next agenda item is Stillwater Estates, 11 Wheeler Road. I know we have a few pieces of correspondence in our materials for today. Fiona, do you want to possibly kick us off on this?
Absolutely. So in the meeting materials, we attached the letter from Mr. Schwarta, basically stating that his Grafton Land Trust, his client, will be rescinding the 81W petition, but in doing so, and I'll read the letter as it's stated to make sure that I'm capturing it correctly. To simplify matters with the board, Grafton Land Trust respectfully withdraws its modification petition at this time. By doing so, it simplifies the legal issues and places the matter squarely with the board as to whether, on its own initiative, it'll modify the subdivision approval to address this very public stormwater management issue or let the project continue to flood the trail. The trail involved is a trail used heavily by the public. The board continuously spoke at meetings about the importance of the protection of the trail. Grafton Land Trust hopes that the board will, on its own initiative, assure the protection of this asset and the community and not risk future closure of same due to erosion. So essentially we had consulted with town council and as well as the town engineer, Graves Engineering, about in response to this letter. And essentially what we found was that when we first corresponded with town council, she said, essentially that since the 81W petition is rescinded, the board can basically make it, can choose to, she recommended that the board and the town staff weigh in to determine if the impact to the trail will be, an adverse impact to the public, and to basically consult with appropriate staff to determine if that's true. I had followed up with Graves Engineering, as I mentioned, to confirm if this was in fact the case, in response to the letter and a series of photographs that was submitted by Mr. Schwarta. And essentially the findings from Graves Engineering was that the site was satisfactory and compliant with the submitted plans. They have been out multiple times and each time have noted no issues. So as the matter stands, the plan that they're in compliance with, and they've been in compliance with their submitted plans. So I think at this point, there's really, the board does not need to act at this time. I mean, Eve, I don't know if you want to elaborate, but we're at the, we've consulted with the necessary parties multiple times and gone back and forth. I called and followed up with our engineer and wanted to just confirm, submitted the photographs to them, and their professional opinion was that there is no issues at this time.
All right. Does any member of the board have any questions or comments for staff at this time on what was just presented?
Well, yeah, I sent an email, 25 minutes before the meeting started to Fiona. I can't imagine why. She said in the comments she had in her report that the land trust requests the planning board determine if the public interest is adversely affected. The public interest is adversely affected by the development conditions. And its alleged effect on flooding the abutting trail, which they own. But then later on, she says, our counsel advised, I suppose her, and or consultants to determine whether it is their professional opinion that the public interest is being adversely affected by deficiency. So I don't know whether, if counsel is saying, staff, make a determination and tell her, or if we have the board involved at all.
Go ahead.
Because if the board's not involved, we can go home. or at least move on.
Yeah, and Bob, I apologize for the confusion with the letter, and yeah, I definitely could have probably worded that in a more clear way, but I just wanted to say that yes. So basically, the order of operations was that once we received the letter from Mr. Schwarta, we consulted with town council, who then responded and said, you know, ultimately, staff and consultants, specifically the engineering team, should make a determination, their professional opinion, if the public interest is being adversely affected, which then I acted on and followed up with Graves Engineering to make that determination. Ultimately, you know, and Mr. Schwarter can speak to this, but I was basically wanted to take, using the professional opinion of our engineer, take the responsibility. I mean, it's no longer the board's responsibility based on council's advice and then my follow-up, because if everything is checking out in their professional opinion, then we should be all set. But yeah, so essentially we started off with town council basically recommending that, you know, put the ball back in the court of town staff and consultants, which then we followed up and did our due diligence in that regard. And then from there said, you know, I wrote the memo making kind of a professional recommendation to the board to kind of get themselves out of the middle, essentially.
Well, the thing is that the engineers telling us this is the way it is during construction is one thing.
Right.
But the question that's being asked is the public interest being harmed? And I think that the planning board is where you answer that question. So I have a problem with staff answering that question so it's a definitive closure to this. And before we go too far through it, we can save some time if the board's not going to make a determination based on the question.
Go ahead, Eve.
Hi, I just wanted to elaborate. When the planning board considered the subdivision in the first place, the public interest was taken into account. The stormwater was designed in a certain manner so that there was a discussion with the Grafton Land Trust and some money exchanged hands for the public interest of the trail and for the reworking of the trail. The question now is the Grafton Land Trust has posited that it's not working correctly. Whatever was approved, that they built it as approved. Our engineer Graves has said they built it, as far as he can tell, they built it exactly as it was approved. It's not a deficiency in the plans, and that was what the planning board asked for. I'm assuming when you were going through the subdivision process, you took into account all of the information at the time and wanted to have it designed correctly. It was designed. Our engineer continues to think it works correctly, and there's been no evidence. You know, during the construction, he has found no evidence that it's creating a problem on the Grafton Land Trust, and it's built correctly in the way that you were expecting it to work. So I would say that assuming it's if your hired engineer had come back and said, yeah, it's not built the way it's supposed to, or it isn't working the way it's supposed to, then I would say the board could weigh in and say, but it is. It's just that the Grafton Land Trust has a problem with water potentially on their trail. It isn't. They haven't shown anything that I can see from an engineer that says it's the water that's coming off of there might have been water on the trail beforehand. There's no cause and effect. The subdivision is causing the problems, and they haven't submitted anything from an engineer explaining that is the case. And our engineer Graves has said he doesn't see a problem with the way it is, and he's been out there 3 times. So I understand that the planning board may want to move forward with this, but I think that the planning board took into account all of the public interest and all the other stormwater issues when they approved it in the first place. They've built it the way it was approved, and our engineer does not have an issue with what's going on.
you know, what we haven't had a chance to do is ask the land trust's engineer about this. And I'm disappointed. I thought he was going to be here tonight. I've been told each time that he couldn't make it tonight, but he'll make it the next time. Because I want to ask him precisely about, is there more water being discharged? Is it being discharged at a higher rate? All he said was, I don't think he said it's a problem, if I recall, but it's been a while now.
Right.
He says it's a problem, but I need to figure out if this project has increased the flow in some way. We ought to analyze that and see if, what about it? Without that, I don't know. And I still have my peak flow versus total flow question. And I think Mike probably has some answers.
So, yeah, Mr. Swarta, I want to give you the opportunity to speak to this, so go ahead.
Yeah, I have Mike Swarta, 32 Barbara Jean Street, representing the Grafton Land Trust, and I believe Rob Aberg is still there in the hearing room. And Rob will supplement some things from the land trust end. Just a quick explanation. We withdrew our petition simply to simplify matters. It really didn't matter whether it was us or the board. Ultimately, it was going to be the board's determination whether there were conditions that warranted a modification. I will disagree with the staff in the sense that the board has the ability to take information and make a modification. If everything is built according to the plan, but the plan doesn't work, then it would seem to me it's incumbent on the board to make a modification. Otherwise, you'd never make a modification to a plan. In this case, I mean, we all know there are times engineers make mistakes and that things are done according to the engineered specs and it doesn't work right. And I think this is one of those cases. As far as the evidence, we have presented some information in my August letter that indicated from our engineer that there would be degradation of the trail based upon the flows coming out. And we also have presented the pictures, which it really is a bit frustrating that we show after major storms that a trail is flooded deeply, which is used by the public, and it's the only use of that portion of the property. This isn't like we have flooding in a small portion of a 3-acre site that nobody uses. This is the whole function of this area is to allow people to get to the Gamir Woods property. And the flooding denies that. It totally denies the use at that point. With regard to Mr. Hassinger, with regard to clarifying matters with an engineer, at this point, we wanted to make sure before we spent any additional monies on details with the engineer that we got the standing issue resolved and the board would be open to receiving that information. I know that Mr. Aberg and Rob can speak to it. I know it is on the board's agenda for Thursday night, I believe. And if the board would like further information in detail from an engineer, we will bring that to the board and hopefully come back at some point in the future with that information so that you can make your decision.
Yeah, speaking as the chair, I think that without that information from the land trust engineer, we don't have much more that we can act on from a material data perspective. I think we have the response from our engineer, we have the input from our staff that all indicates that things are designed well. They are not. There's not any problem that's new because of development, and having the input from the land trust engineer in writing, and potentially the ability for the engineer to also appear at one of our board meetings to have the opportunity for our board and potentially our peer review engineer to also be present to, converse and identify what the actual issues are and what can and can't be done regarding it is something that would be very useful for being able to make any determination beyond it's all good. So I sympathize, and I definitely want to see this trail be as useful as it possibly can be, but I don't want to say too much until we have more of that paperwork, from from the engineers. Go ahead, Eve.
I would just suggest that this was an issue that was brought up at conservation in the course of some discussions, and the Conservation Commission listened to Graves, Jeff Walsh, and where he indicated exactly what he's been telling us, and conservation took that and said, okay, it's working the way it's supposed to, and invited the Grafton Land Trust, if you've got evidence to show that it's not, come back, and they haven't gone back. I would suggest that I've now been here, this is my third meeting, and this has been on the agenda every time. I would suggest that the board make a decision not to move forward with what's going, with the information they have, and if the Grafton Land Trust decides in a month or 2 months or 3 months to have their engineer come, and provides any new information that, gets reviewed by our engineer, then you might probably bring it up, but to continue to have it on the agenda where no new information is coming forward. And at the last meeting, I actually had asked Jeff Walsh from Graves to sit in on the meeting in case there was some discussion, in case there was some analysis that needed to be refuted, and he did, and still the Grafton Land Trust did not bring their own engineer. So the only engineer, as far as I can tell, that's on record with any kind of analysis specific to, I went out there 3 times and this is the way it was supposed to be built and it seems to be working, is your consulting engineer that works for the board that has said it's fine. If I would suggest that the planning board at this point say this matter is closed until such time as further information is brought forward, but I would hesitate to have you just continue to put it on the agenda waiting for someone to come or not come. And this is the third meeting that we've been talking about it, so that's my suggestion.
A couple of points that come to my mind. Number one is the issue here seems to be the design of the drainage system. And the stormwater design has been determined by the Conservation Commission, who is the local regulatory authority for stormwater drainage. They've determined that the system, the design, meets all of the applicable regulations, local and state, regarding stormwater drainage. The subdivision approval from the planning board also basically takes that into account, but by deferring the details to the stormwater regulations administered by Concom. So the planning board on its own is not primarily responsible for directly approving the stormwater design. As noted, we work very closely with Concom. They're the primary regulatory authority locally. And again, this design has been determined by both boards to currently be in full compliance with all applicable local and state regulations. Now, other drainage designs could be arrived at that would also be in compliance with the appropriate regulations. This board is in possession of no information that would propose an alternative stormwater design. This board is being asked to modify the approval to address the issue, but we have no alternative design before us. And the planning board is not in the business of designing, doing the engineering work. That's the response. The developer is responsible for that. Now, absent any other information, if the subdivision developer were to come up with an alternative design, perhaps in collaboration with the land trust, that could come before this board for review under Section 81W. And it is true that the board, 81W gives the board the authority to, on its own initiative, modify an approval. The advice that we get in certain subdivision law guidance documents is that this is best done with the agreement of the developer. And that gets back to, this is not the first time we've brought up the topic, that if the land trust and the subdivision owner, developer, propose an alternative, a modification of the stormwater design, that comes back to this board under 81W, and we can deal it, we can review it. But it's not this board's, I don't believe this board has ever engaged in engineering work itself to design a change. Furthermore, if you look at Chapter 41, Section 81DD, if we were to impose a modification on the developer without the developer's consent, the developer can make the town pay for any additional costs. And I do not think that we want to put the town at risk of being forced to cover the additional costs that we impose upon a developer. It's far preferable. I mean, one might imagine some unusual cases where this might actually be appropriate, but it's far preferable to have something that the developer brings to us for approval that may address the problem. But on our own initiative, I do not recommend that the board, and I would not vote for the board undertaking to propose a modification without the cooperation of the developer.
I don't think anyone's asking for that.
I hope not. However, I will note again for the record that
if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
I do want to clarify that we had proposed an alternative, and I think that was described in one of the letters that I sent to the board, which was an increased width on the riprap and a surface that would be acceptable to ADA. And we actually had talked about paving stones, the tic-tac-toe grid to be filled in with gravelish substance that would allow ADA compliance. So I do think we actually proposed an alternative during one of the several meetings that we've had.
And what happened to it?
The developer did not want to move forward.
Would that have been?
There was a small offer of compensation, but it was a pittance of what it was going to cost us to do it. As I said at one point, we had offered to fund 50% of the increased cost, and it was rejected by the developer. I will say that, Mr. Aberg could speak to this, but there has been serious discussion among board members about just shutting down the trail because they do not want to have any liabilities of people slipping, falling, any of that type that would be created by the conditions, particularly now in the winter where there can be icing from this added effluent that's coming off of the site. And so just as a heads up, that board, it's been no vote by the board or anything, but I have spoken with members that there is a concern.
What I haven't been able to get clear is whether the subdivision project has made the condition worse. The trail had problems, as always had problems. I think Prabhu, I think he's mentioned that.
Yep.
Has it made it worse? Was there something missing? If it is worse, let's try to understand it and all of that. I'm trying to get there. We're not.
Well, I think
what we're doing getting us there.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, just to, from our perspective, let us go and Rob, do you have anything you want to add, Rob, before I speak?
He's waving you off.
He's waving me off. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's my own color on his reaction.
Rob says it's all on you, Mike.
I think in this case, then, we've had discussions, we've got a proposal from an engineer to do some detailed work on this. It'll go before the board on Thursday. If that is passed, we'll come back to you in the future. If we find the evidence that we believe is there, we'll be back to you in the future. I will say that, with all due respect to Mr. Robbins, I'll reserve rights to comment on later on his statement about the town having to pay for any modification. And as a heads up, this drainage system's got to go to somebody at some point. I know there was discussions very early on, the land trust might accept the drainage system. That certainly is not going to happen. And I would assume that this area is, at some point, it may end up with the town. So whether or not it's being paid for as part of a modification, or whether it actually ends up in the town's lap in the future, I don't know. But certainly the land trust is not going to take responsibility for it. I know that.
I will not likely be here when it comes back, because I might be here one more meeting. But I would maybe suggest that if the land trust does come back with some engineering details of their own, that included in that it show that the condition of the trail is worse because of the development, because there has to be a cause and effect. And I can't find it right now, but in one of the previous memos, there was a lot of engineering language that I believe indicated that it wasn't necessarily there was a way. I'm not an engineer, but I think there is a way to show where the water is coming from with siltation and the like, and there has been no evidence shown to my knowledge in reading the memos and in speaking to the conservation agent, that whatever is making the trail wet now is because of the subdivision, and isn't just, or maybe it was already wet before. I don't know. I just want to make sure that there's a cause and effect, because that's really the only possibility that the planning board could get involved if in fact the subdivision is causing it. But the idea was that it was designed and approved by Concom and the planning board and our consulting engineer to standards that would make sure that that the water's not making it worse.
Momentarily off subject, point of order. I do believe we need a motion, and I so make the motion to continue this meeting past 10 o'clock.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Present.
Ms. Hassinger.
Yes, of course.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Yes.
And I vote aye. I declare this meeting will continue past 10 p.m. We do not turn to pumpkin.
Mr. Chairman, if I might have a moment of personal privilege. Mr. Hassinger sounds like he was voting in Congress the other night about being president.
Yeah.
With that, listen, I think we've got our instructions. We appreciate the patience of the board to continue to consider this. It is a town, even though it's not owned by the town, it is a public resource, and we hope we can get that information to you. And if it develops that we do not have that information, we won't be bothering you again regarding same.
Yeah, and again, just a reminder on 81DD, if we impose a modification on the developer and they do not consent to it, they have the right to recover damages from us.
We can bring that back when we discuss further. Pablo, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Justin. I just want to put it on record. When this proposal came in for Stillwater Estates, we talked about the trail, and as part of the PAC and the Scout troop, this trail has been extensively used. A trail is a trail. Where I'm struggling is, on one end, a trail is exposed to all the all the nature and what Mother Nature has to do, heavy flooding and whatnot and stuff. So that is one part of the story, right? That is something natural. We'll deal with it. If you're hiking, you will hike, and if it's mushy and stuff, you don't. But here, is the planning board having any responsibility, authority or not? That's the part. To me, as I hear and learn more and more, I feel we are not in, the planning board doesn't have the authority to get involved. Whereas as an individual, outside of me being a planning board member, I do want to sound out to Rob and say that, Mr. Ebert, that when there is a need, if on behalf of, when the land trust gets involved in maintaining this trail, because this land trust supports all the trails in town, I would want to be part of that. I would definitely volunteer my time and effort to make sure that this trail is not lost to the town forever. That would be a disaster. It's a beautiful trail, and it's been used extensively. I just want to put it out there. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. Did you guys learn more, Rob?
Yeah, so
Just
we
state
do have a
your
board
name
meeting. This is Rob Aberg, 43 South Street. I am representing the Land Trust tonight. For people that won't be here in the future, I've been here for about 25 years. I've hiked on that trail for about 23 of those years. It was wet before, there's no doubt. Now, when it rains, and I sent the photographic evidence that seems to be discounted, the water is over the top of my hiking boots. It was never like that in any of the other 22 years until this effluent started flowing out of the pipe. So I urge all of you to go out when it's raining, not like when Graves goes out when it's not raining. Of course, when it's dry, there's no evidence of water. So we'll do our best to keep the trail open. And if the basin is built as it was designed, that's beside the point we've been trying to make. That's being roundly dismissed with a smile. It's really not appreciated. So we're here working very hard to look out for the best interests of Grafton. I know the planning board is doing the same. We're not trying to use you as our muscle, as was intimated in previous meetings. We're looking at the waiver that was granted. The second waiver for this allowed this discharge pipe to be put in. Our verbal assurance by Joe Layden, the town planner at the time, was that we were overreaching our concern. Rob, it will only be a 100-year flood. It will only ever come out of the basin on a 100-year flood. Now we come to find out that's not true by looking closer at the plans. Yeah, we missed that detail on page 11.3, detail 4. But these things are difficult, and it's impacting the town. With all due respect to all this engineering, go walk out when it rains, and when the water goes over your boot, you'll see what happens. So we have a board meeting for the Land Trust in a couple of Thursdays. We'll see if we can vote more money to get the engineering done that wasn't done before. And we'll start maybe taking the measurements to show the water that's overflowing the protective wattles and weirs that's provided evidence that the construction measures are not working properly. I guess we'll take that to Concom with the engineering report based on money that people send in on their own to the Land Trust to support conservation in Grafton. That's what we'll have to use the money for. So thank you for your attention. We won't bother you again until we have some harder evidence. We'll have to look at getting a new engineer. So thank you for all your indulgence with this over the past several months.
All right. Is there anything further on this that the board wishes to take up tonight?
I don't think there's anything more for us to do until and if someone comes back with something new to work with.
Information that would credibly demonstrate the need for a modification, and it's really the only modification that there could be that we would have any authority under to include, it would be a modification of the drainage design. So if the drainage design, although in compliance with the regulations. If it is not doing the job it's expected to do, evidence to that effect would be a point in favor of further pursuing that. Again, I would remind everybody that without the consent of the developer, it's a big risk.
Well, I think if we got down to that, then we'd be in a position to talk about that question.
Yeah,
Actually,
we're not there
consider
yet.
Doing something. And I think we could stop spinning our wheels and get on with our agenda.
All right. Sounds good to me. Thank you, Mrs. Swarta. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you all for your patience with all this.
Happy New Year to everybody.
Yes, and to you too.
I have a technical question.
Yes.
It's under action items. Does that mean you have to actually take some action or just decide not to take action? Is that also an action to decide not to take action?
Typically treated action items as we have the potential likelihood to take an action, but it's not required to take an action.
That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yeah, people sometimes complain, yeah, it was just, a subject with no indication that there was anything under consideration to actually be voted on.
So if it's under action items, you may take an action, but you're not obligated to.
Yes.
So, okay, so we're good.
All right. Now,
this is going to be a tough one, the next one.
To potentially jump around the agenda, just to ask Mr. Berger, are you only here for remaining the parking VMU item? I am. I would like to take that out of order at the permission of the board.
Let's do that one and give Mr. Berger an opportunity to put his 2 cents in and then bail out.
Then I'll go home and watch it on Zoom.
With any luck, by the time you get home, we'll be done.
Okay.
All right. So we have on here the discussion item for zoning bylaw modification, parking in the VMU district in Grafton Common. Does staff have anything in particular they want to talk about, or should I just hand it over to Mr. Berger?
Feel free to hand it over. Yep, nothing.
So, as I'm going through the bylaw, let's just go to Grafton Common. Grafton Common, we have no parking in Grafton Common. We tried to put a bylaw in front of town meeting and it got pulled back. And the reason why it got pulled back is I think we added some language in there that Bill McCusker didn't like. But we have to go back and think about what we want to do. Personally, I wanted to dumb it down. I just want to say the parking regulations, whatever the number is, just does not apply to the Grafton Common area. But then Chris brought in, if it's new construction, then it would have to comply. So we really have to get some language in there because he does make good sense. If somebody takes one Grafton Common down, let's take it down because we're going to use that particular parcel as an example. Take it down and put an apartment complex in where they're going to get their parking. They could go parking under. So we might want to think about, for new construction, the bylaw would have to revert back to whatever regulation we have. I think we're going to need Fiona's help in writing that bylaw so we can work the language through. But that was the concern when we had to pull it back. And I know somebody who wants to go into one of those older buildings right now, but they're not going to have the parking for it. So it's going to be the same issue that we had with Pageant's Bar.
Yeah.
And it's always everybody in that circle doesn't have parking, and they're all using that 300 spaces. There's not 300 spaces there. I don't know what's around the common.
Yeah, I think the key there was to decide, under what circumstances do we want someone in that Grafton Common Historic District to provide parking.
Right.
The new construction idea, that seemed simple until, the point that McCusker raised was, well, what about expanding an existing building? The expansion, is that new construction or not? So that's where the simplest idea was just no parking requirement within the historic district.
And I would still go for that.
Yeah.
You know, build it, and if it can support whatever you build with no parking, well, that's fine. We may have to go that route. But because it gets kind of complicated.
And then there's also the issue of if there's a substantial new use, like if someone buys One Grafton Common and without tearing it down, turns it into an apartment complex.
But I think that it just stands just the way it is.
Yeah.
It stands with parking regulations are exempt for the historic district. I think that's how we put it.
Yeah, and I would be inclined to keep it that simple, unless we can think. Let's think about it. Let's think it through, and see if we can't come up with some sensible, sufficiently clear rules for when you do and when you don't have to provide parking. But if we can't come up with anything that really seems to work, keep it simple.
And that might pass town meeting.
Yeah.
And then if we find there's a problem, then we can always go back and modify. But I think we have to, if we're never gonna start, we're never gonna end. So I think we have to do something.
Yeah, Mr. Ashener, go ahead.
Why don't we get Bill McCusker to come in and work with us on this? Make him happy. But other than that, I was just sort of thinking that you sort of want the kind of grandfathering rules. What's there is grandfathered, and exactly how you delineate, what's there, the same or similar use, in same or similar amount, is exempt because it's in place now. It's been in place, but if new things come along, then they need at least maybe a special permit. If they
But that's the problem.
if
That's-
they can't
that's-
provide,
That's
If
the
they-
problem right there. Because,
can't-
you got Pageant's Bar in One Grafton Common. That's a new use, which needed parking. You need one space for every 3 chairs.
Right.
And again, he doesn't have it. Or if you have Jordan's Garage across the street and they're just on it, they have 2 parking spaces. And that's it. And now they have a thrift shop or a gift shop there. No parking. So I think again, we've got to make it simple. Just exempt it. Exempt it and let's see what happens.
well, I am a little concerned about some of the examples you make. Special permit. If you want to do something on the common and you don't have the parking in hand to do it, you need to get a special permit to avoid the parking requirement. And this planning board can give that in the case of the historic district or however you want to draw the line. That gives the opportunity to deal with it. We have no idea, this wild range of possibilities of things that might happen, and there's no way to make a perfect answer. If you do it with a special permit, you get discretion. You get an opportunity for discretion, and
to play devil's advocate, you have a small little brick building. It's next to 2 Grafton Common. I don't remember what's in there right now, but let's say they want to open up a hair salon. No, let's say they want to open up a cafe, right? Because I want something that we can actually count. And they've got 10 chairs. So you're going to need 5 parking spots. They're going to come in here for a special permit. What's your criteria on granting that special permit? So, now we're going into another step. I don't think you have any criteria right now for granting the special permit where they don't have any parking.
That's exactly what we did with the pub. We looked at it. People didn't want that use because it was going to decimate the parking. Going to be a big problem. We looked at it, concluded probably that was not going to be enough of a problem to worry about. Next time, maybe a different answer. Depends on the use.
I'll leave it to the board to make up their minds on which way they want to go.
Yeah, like I suggested earlier, think about it.
Yeah.
See if we can't come up with some rules that make sense. But if we can't really nail that down, the simplest thing to do is just to eliminate parking requirements, which will work in a lot of cases, we think.
Right. So the other one, and I have an old zoning book, but I have it really memorized. Village mixed use. We really have to maybe go back to our parking off-street regulation and somehow put a condition in there that if they don't meet it, then they could get a special permit through the planning board if they can prove they have adequate parking off-site. I think that case would work, but there's not too many places in Grafton that it's going to work. Right. Only if it was, near the common where you have public parking, because Grafton doesn't have public parking, and you can't have off-street parking.
Well, there are some cases in mixed use, hypothetical mixed use for us, largely I think, is if it's truly a mixed use where you've got commercial and residential combined, weekday parking will tend to be occupied by commercial businesses. Weekend and weeknight parking will tend to be occupied more by residential. So there's an overlap there that can be exploited.
That'd be like a shared parking.
Right, it's sort of a shared parking thing. So that works, that can work, and it may, it sort of speaks to the need to, consider different individual cases. Because what you can do in a mixed use is you can just build housing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're within the confines of the housing that you're building, there's no mixed use. It's all residential. And because Grafton is inherently a car-centric town, you need adequate parking for the residents and visitors. And if that parking is not shared in a way that works, like being shared with a commercial parking, then for residential only parking, you're going to need more. And you've kind of proposed something along these lines, Bob, that you look at a case, and depending on circumstances, different rules may apply. If there is parking available nearby, sufficient quantity and sufficiently close, then you can go with a smaller parking requirement for the residential component of the development. But if that residential component doesn't have any nearby parking that they can leverage, then they really need to provide more. And the case that brought this up is a good example of that.
Right.
So I think what probably we need to look at is to find the right way to define the necessary flexibility to ensure that adequate parking is available, leveraging shared parking where it's available, or adjacent parking or on-street parking, leveraging nearby parking when and where it's available, but where nothing like that is available, you really need to provide more parking on site.
Yeah,
I think we can work on rules along those lines.
And we should try to get the 2.25 for multiple units that forces them into really start thinking about the visitors parking. And if it is a true mixed use group, then there could be a special permit through the planning board planning board to show that they have sufficient parking when the businesses are gone and the people are back in. I think that's something that, you know, we're gonna have to work on and present back to the board.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I for one would be open to looking at that. I think it's important to give that kind of flexibility, because sort of in the long run, ideally, we would like to see a reduced dependence on cars. But that's not happening in Grafton within my lifetime.
No.
I mean, the only from a parking perspective, the only places where that could reasonably happen, reduced parking per unit, per residential unit, is when there is other parking available nearby.
Well,
that
it
can
could,
be shared.
what you're talking about is, 8 Pine Street. With that big that big 317 and 10,000 square feet in the 5-story parking garage, and 27 Upton Street, where it's that, but cut in half. You can have reduced parking there because you get 5,000 square feet of commercial space with 117 units. So, but that should be under a special permit for the parking, not now, because that's not what our regulation is. But instead of taking the 2 spaces for a 3 unit or the 1.5 for a 2 unit, this is where we have to modify. And that's all I have to say on parking for tonight.
So the question for the board is, do we want to aim to try to get this done for the Maytown meeting?
I would say yes.
If we can, recognizing that it may take longer than we think to develop these things, in which case, rather than rush it, sometimes we shoot for May and we don't quite make it, so we've always got October.
I think we should try.
If we shoot for May on these,
Yeah, I think we should shoot for May.
It seems
I think we should try to have draft language, or at least a draft idea of what we're going to approach, in time for end of February. That way there we can at least, discuss it and make sure the board is on board with the approach we're going with.
All right.
That's what I'm thinking. That way there we can try to have the final language, in enough time for, Maytown meeting without having to, feel like we're rushing it.
Are you good with the end of February to come back with that language?
Yep, end of February is fine.
That's my rough thinking.
Okay. On that note, I think I'm done.
All right, thank you.
Planning board, have a good night.
You too.
You too.
Nobody here.
Don't do that.
All right, that brings us back to our approval of planner as signatory for A&R plans and decisions. Do I have a motion to approve Fiona to sign A&Rs and decisions on behalf of the board? I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion?
Now, this is after the board votes.
Yes.
There was a time, long ago, there was a time when the planner actually looked at them and signed them, I think, without, having to go through. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, so moved.
This is the routine thing with the new planner.
Yep. So,
Same as always.
I have a motion. Discussion is done, I believe. And Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Fiona is allowed to sign. Yay! The board will have to come back to sign the Worcester Registry of Deeds sheet. Staff can coordinate that with the board.
There will be paperwork for the board to sign.
Yes. Our next action item is open space and recreation plan. Given that is 1023, Mr. Robbins, how do we want to approach this? Do we want to move on this, or do we want to push it to a meeting?
I will suggest that, being the person who created this list and sent it to the board, being the board's representative on the open space recreation committee, what this is basically for all the open space and recreation plan action items assigned to this board. We just want to know what's happened, up through the end of 2022, what's been done on these. And I can probably answer all of these. This ultimately is going to go into the annual town report. The data is due into the annual town report by the end of this month. So we actually have another planning board meeting coming up at which the board could review. I could propose answers to these questions and the board could review them for comments. Or if anybody has any, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to spend too much time on it tonight, but.
Let's do that.
Yep. My thought, along with Bob's assertion there, is yes, go ahead and propose answers. We can formally vote as a board on those answers at our next meeting. And if any board member has suggestions, comments, or anything in advance of the next meeting, they can send directly to Dave.
I mean,
for,
it's mostly pretty straightforward.
Yes.
Now, the first one, reconcile town stormwater regulations with the subdivision rules and regulations. Done. We did that.
Yep.
So these are generally not going to require complex answers.
Okay. I don't think we need to take a vote on letting you create a draft that we then will vote on the next
And
meeting.
in fact, to my knowledge, the responses to this don't technically require a board vote. But
yeah, can't hurt, but it doesn't. We don't need to.
Not gonna hurt.
The board can agree or disagree with what I think the board has done on these.
Okay. That brings us to our next agenda item, which is the discussion item of master plan. I know we have a staff memo on that and things regarding the scope of service for phase 2 and 3.
Yes.
Is there any problem at this moment on anybody's table about that?
I'm happy with it. With what was in our memo and with the phases.
Let's say good.
I think the only sort of action, short-term action that comes out of this is for us to start thinking about how we are going to organize our side of the master plan development. It's moving into a new phase of stakeholder engagement, public outreach, and right now CMRPC staff have been doing pretty much everything, and it's kind of time for us to figure out how we organize our end of it.
When we have it figured out, we can do something about it.
Yeah. So
we move on.
Yes, we can talk more about this at our next meeting when maybe we have a little bit more time. But that's something to think about between now and the next meeting.
All right. And the next discussion item is regarding the DLTA hours with CMRPC.
Do we need to decide anything there?
May I? So I just presented the materials and kind of gave some ideas for the board to look over in terms of what, priorities are. I had run when I had originally received the email from CMRPC's kind of generic news blast about this opportunity, it was something that I thought would be exciting to jump on, but understanding that there is definitely we need to have our request in by January 2nd, ultimately for the Physical Development Committee to review on the 19th. I know that there's a time crunch. I mean, that puts us in a position where we will probably need to nail down a project soon if we want to make that deadline. With that being said, there is another deadline in March. I will say that I was on a Zoom webinar about this opportunity, and most of the planners in the surrounding area most of them were pursuing March and just kind of getting an idea of what they wanted to do. Not saying that that's the avenue that Grafton has to go down, but just something to kind of think about if we're not ready to kind of move on any of the recommendations in this memo at the moment. I will say that I had kind of created a preliminary list just when I first got here, kind of a scan of opportunities, and then I did run the opportunity for DLTA funding by the town administrator, who was in favor of the energy and environment best practices and greenhouse gas reduction items. And I know that obviously the open space and OSRP is, a top priority. So kind of thinking about how we can merge the priorities of the town administrator with what we're doing here and in the planning department, you know, I was just kind of thinking through some ideas for the board. If we are, you know, if we need to take more time to think about that and nail down a final project, then that is fine. But yeah, this was kind of a preliminary list. The long solicitation that was sent to us is pages on pages of opportunities of things we can pursue. But I just wanted to also make a point to say that the projects and Mr. Hassinger had pointed out, you know, it's typically my staff contact at CMRPC had said, you know, you try and aim for a high priority project that can be done in a calendar year, which does, you know, kind of limit the scope oftentimes of things that can be pursued. So if there is, you know, something of interest to the board that was listed on the memo tonight, or if I need to go back to the drawing board and think of additional suggestions, then maybe we can go for March. I'm happy to do that. But just knowing that we want to make progress on implementation of the OSRP and some other kind of major planning goals, you know, I'm happy to work. I mean, ultimately CMRPC, from my understanding, is that they will be writing most of the application. I work with them, but we kind of work in conjunction, but they work with us to kind of iron out some of these items. Basically, like the project description, we really do that with them, as well as kind of cost estimate, even though really it is no cost to the town. And then I work on kind of more the commitment, the letters of commitment, which I need to secure at least two, I would say, either one from the town administrator and then one from our CMRPC delegate, Mr. Hassinger, at minimum. So that you know, it's definitely a commitment to try and get it done by the 12th. A challenge that I definitely am up to if we do think that there's anything that's listed that you want to pursue. But if we need to talk further, then so be it.
Go ahead, Bob.
Some of you, maybe all of you, know that I am on physical development committee at CMRPC, have been since long before this funding source emerged and the way the committee deals with it has evolved. So I have a pretty good idea of how it works. And I've observed, you know, a long time. I believe that it is calendar year. You're supposed to, I think this is the one where we're supposed to have finished the project by the end of the calendar year. Now, Fiona can clarify that. The folks up at CMRPC, my impression is they work very closely and very helpfully. And I think if you more or less had conversations one-on-one with them, Fiona, that you could zero in a lot on requirements and possibilities quickly. Getting in on this first round can't be bad because we'll probably vote some good chunk of the money this time, and there'll be less money left. And it's flexible. They move the money around. You know, sometimes a project's not going, so they shift the money in future increments. Most of the money gets spent, as far as I can see, on CMRPC services, although that's not necessarily the case. You know, that I think that money can be used in other ways. So I just say, get into good conversation, Fiona, with the folks up there. Take along any if any, I would say, if anybody has a particular project idea, give it to Fiona so she knows that, you know, there's interest in it. Okay.
I have one question there.
Go ahead, Prabhu.
If I may, question. So there is an economic development plan seeking some inputs. How does the EDC, and should the EDC not be involved in any of these project work or effort, not trying to solve this at 10:35 tonight. But if how do we bring EDC in so that there is something more concrete that can be aligned?
Sure, I can respond to that. Thank you for that question. Yes, so I have briefed John Allen about this opportunity and that we're examining avenues and how we can loop in EDC more. I think we'll need to talk. I mean, when I briefed him, it was toward was more recent. So meeting the January deadline is just always kind of a concern in the back of my head. If we wanted to do something more in depth with them, I'm inclined to say that we should pursue March opportunity just so they have time to talk about it amongst, have it on their agenda items and kind of prioritize what they want to do. Should we decide that we want to pursue an economic development best practice activity, as they say in their solicitation? But if that is the avenue that the board thinks is a top priority and wants to go down, then I will take the necessary steps to make sure that I'm getting on their next agenda and we're talking through what we can do there. So can I just ask a clarifying question? If an economic development, did you see anything in terms of the solicitation that stuck out as a kind of top priority in your opinion under that category?
No, I didn't pay that much attention. I do have to read up, but I can get back to you on that.
Sure.
One piece of this is these are relatively small opportunities, relatively small amounts of funding. We'll typically see somewhere in the $5,000 to $30,000 or $40,000 range, something like that. So you can't, there's a lot you can't do. Modest, doable projects. So smaller scope might make it easier to get to some answers, and easier to get to some approvals.
Right. And I'd like to just add that, yes, it's definitely a low-hanging fruit type of situation. Like, maybe, just kind of bearing that in mind when we're kind of thinking through when we nail down something that we want to pursue, something that can be done realistically in that time frame. And I just wanted to speak to Mr. Hassinger's comment earlier about the majority of the funding does go to, work that CMRPC then carries out, but they did make a point to tell me that the application is looked upon more favorably if the town can contribute, staff hours in kind to getting things done as well. So we can also kind of think through what that's going to look like.
Yeah. Okay. What else do we have?
So, just to recap, I think, yes, if we can target...
You know what time it is.
I know what time it is. I'm still going to talk. I think if we can target something for the first round, that'd be beneficial. I think your list is a good, starting point. I'd be happy with anything on that list personally. And I think, as Bob says, we can move on.
Okay, great. Can I just have one more comment?
Yes,
if planning board members could send me, their top priority project, that would be helpful, because I did list it. I should have probably nailed it down a little bit. I should have probably made the options in the memo a little bit more concise, but I didn't want to neglect, I didn't want to hyper focus on just one topic that might not be a priority for everyone. So all right. Thank you.
Thank you. So that brings us to our next item, which, if I'm looking at this right, is bills.
Move we approve the bills as distributed.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the bills. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare we can pay our bills.
We're allowed to do it.
The
Yeah.
next agenda item is minutes of previous meeting. We have minutes for November 14th, which was our meeting but not a meeting.
Move that we approve with any adjustments that we come up with in discussion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. My only commentary is under public hearings on the minutes for item A for the 16 Morgan Drive. The clerk read the public hearing notice. I do not believe we read a public hearing notice considering that that was a continuation of a hearing.
That is correct.
Yes.
So we can strike that line. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassner.
Aye.
Ms. Hassender.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare the minutes approved as amended as discussed. Staff report.
So in addition to everything that we've talked about this evening, the other top priorities that I've been working on really are trying to craft a more specific job description for the staff planner position, and I'm working right now with the town administrator to try and see how we can look at making, rewriting that description and also making, the salary more competitive to try and build out our department. So that's been another top priority. And other than that, I did meet with the Affordable Housing Trust chair and beginning to work with them on their projects and kind of jumping into that in earnest. But and kind of working on our safe harbor status, our housing production plan, and making sure that our SHI is getting to that 10%, and also talking to working with the town administrator closely on that. But those are the two other kind of top priorities at this moment.
Okay. Sounds good. Anybody have anything from correspondence?
Nothing caught my eye.
All right.
Move we adjourn.
Hold it. Reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC.
Nothing.
Now hearing none, I recognize your motion to adjourn. Any second?
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. This is non-debatable. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassender.
Aye.
Ms. Hassender.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare us adjourned.